Lewin. Oh, thank you. I'm just going to start with an introduction for myself and then head off onto the left here. And then I'll do just a short welcome as well. No Louis Lewis, Escrimo Canyon, Gujay, Auzibaik, Madakmuguk Nagani. So my name is Newell Louis. I am Passamaquoddy and Malice. And I come from Pleasant Point, Indian Township. I don't know. My family's come from Pleasant Point, Indian Township, and Two Big New Brunswick. And I'm happy to be here and happy to be able to chair, and things are settling down for me. So we'll go on to Judd.
I'm Judd S.D. Kendall. I'm a researcher writer for MITSC, and I live in Glenburn, Maine.
I'm Bob Checkaway, a state commissioner from Freeport, and I went to law school with Judd.
Z. Cross McDonald, Holton Band, and Wellmuggock First Nation in New Brunswick. I am the tribal co-commissioner for Holton and the newly appointed tribal ambassador for Holton Band as well.
Richard Rosen. I've served as a state commissioner for 3 years. I live in Bucksport. I currently work as CFO and VP of operations at Maine Maritime Academy.
I'm Sarah Medina. I am a state representative. I live in Dixmont, and I'm a retired forester.
I'm Rachel Bell. I'm the projects coordinator for MITSC, and I live in Edmonds.
Good way. I'm Darren Ranko, and I'm the junior representative from the Penobscot Nation. Happen to work here at the University of Maine, so that's fun to be here.
And we'll go online. We'll start up there with Robert.
You talk about me?
Uh-huh.
Not too many people call me Robert, but anyway, yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Bert Polchis, commissioner appointed by the chief and council of the Penobscot Nation. You know, though I have relations in pretty much every Wabanaki community in Maine and New Brunswick. So anyway, welcome everybody.
Lewin. Going to go with James.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm James Cody. I'm a state commissioner from Farmington, Maine.
Thank you, James. Joe.
Hi, I'm Joey Barnes, member of the Passamaquoddy tribe. I represent Indian Township, and I want to apologize. I am on the road heading to Umpa high school playoff game. I will be on the Zoom, and I'm in Washington County, so the service could be all over the place.
Absolutely. And Paul Tebow.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Tebow, Managing Director of MITSC. I apologize that I am not at the meeting in person. It's because I recently had surgery and I'm on restrictions. I can't travel.
Thank you, Paul. So these other ones are not.
Yeah, those aren't
people,
right.
Well, other than. Oh wait. No.
Well,
MITSC.
Yeah, Carol is just monitoring
Okay.
technology. Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Don't stand up because I'm just feel more comfortable doing that. I'll drop my mask now so maybe you can hear me. As I said, my name is Newell Louis, Passamaquoddy Malice, and I guess the chair appointment or the chair selection happened in January? Is that correct? I can't remember the time frame. Yeah, so, and I wasn't able to fully participate in a lot of the meetings. I've been to a couple of them, to make quorum. And, had some family stuff that was preventing me from full participation. And that could be the case at any time for any of us, I guess, right? Family first is how we look at things. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm glad you are all here as well. Those online and those in the chairs here. And, I was reading some of the comments that came forward from Rachel forwarded to me. And, because I think we're in a time frame where MITSC has a function, right? Or I think it has a function. And I think that if we as a group can find out how we want to move our charge forward and be able to come up with a plan to engage both in the legislative process and with the tribes and the state commissioners and the governor's office, right? Those are all the entities that involve, and one is not any more significant than the other. I am a Passamaquoddy MITSC native in the commissioner's chair. I mean, in the commission's chair, but I'm just here to talk with you, help you out any way that I can. And I don't mean that you need help. I'm just saying that I'm here to assist in any way and maybe moving things forward. I'm not going to drive any agenda from my standpoint or from the tribal standpoint. I will talk with tribal leaders. I will talk with state commissioners. And I will talk with the governor's office as well. Because I think it's important that I find also my role here as the chair, right? And I think one of the comments I read was from Darren. Yeah, that said, we want somebody that's going to be able to stand up and do things and not be afraid to get out there. And, I feel like I am that person to do that. My background is varied, and including working in the forestry industry I wrote computer software for Prentice Carlisle back in the early days of living in Bangor, and worked for tribal health centers, was on the tribal council for Passamaquoddy Pleasant Point, and now I work for Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness. I'm not working for them right now. I'm on leave. And my background also includes linguistics. I also teach Passamaquoddy language, Passamaquoddy MITSC language, a couple times a week. And as a linguist, maybe I was born to be a linguist. I don't know, but it seems like that's people get up and just talk and talk and talk, and I can do that. I don't want to do that. But I just want to make sure that I want to address everybody in the commission and whoever is visiting us, which I don't think anyone yet. To let you know that I'm here, I'm ready to sit in the chair and ready to help us venture through in MITSC. And over the years since 1980, I wasn't really aware of MITSC, and it wasn't until into the 90s probably, and then got more involved in the late 90s and since that point. And I always, first of all, wondered what does MITSC do, right? And I think that's what a lot of people can look to MITSC and say, well, why are they there? What are they doing? What are we doing? And I think if you talk to a lot of the tribal commissioners, the state commissioners, you guys and gals might all still have the same questions as well. How do we come together, right? I can tell you that you know, I want to reach out to the commissioners on one-on-one and speak with you, the state commissioners, tribal commissioners, same thing. I want to speak with you one-on-one about MITSC. And I also want to reach out to the governor's office, like I said. And somebody's going to help me do that. Bob. And I also want to reach out to the tribal leaders and tribal council. And I can tell you, I know all of them. And I have the ability to speak with all of them. I know all of the tribal council members as well. Well, maybe I don't know them all. I'd say I know about 90% of them. There's probably maybe a couple at Holden that I don't know, and maybe a couple at Micmac that I don't, you know, I've never spoken with. And I think all of the ones at Indian Township, I know, all the ones at Pleasant Point, I know. I probably know all the ones at Penobscot, but I'm not sure. I couldn't name them. But, you know, and that's, I think that's an asset in a way that, you know, I can go and talk with them. I'm not, and like I said, I'm not going to drive any agenda, but I just want to reach out to people, you know, at the tribal level, state level, governor's office, and all of us as well to see how, you know, what it is we want to do, and then how we're going to get there. And I really appreciate you all coming today, and excited, nervous a little bit, you know, my first time here, but this never stopped me from talking. And with that, we'll we want to review the agenda. And I think part of the agenda review is that you're just checking in to see if you're all okay with what's on there. And if there's something missing, maybe we can agree to add it before we get to it, because a lot of times you can. I don't even know if you can add things to the agenda prior to the meeting. Maybe, I'm not sure. Is that true or not?
I think we have, but it's not a preferred.
Yeah, and when Paul and Rachel, I did talk about it a little bit, and I couldn't see anything else that we had on there, and we'll get to some of those issues. So.
There's no explicit saying we can't, but our discussions recently seem to be that it's not consistent with a public trust and transparency to have late editions that the public are not
Yes,
aware of.
and I fully agree with that. I mean, that's because, you know, if we added something now, there's nobody in the audience, if you will, but maybe they would have shown up if we had put that on the agenda.
Yeah, I think that's the logic.
Mhm. So did anyone have any comments on it?
Welcome, Bill.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're leaving for that open prayer too. I feel like we were missing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to just start out things, you know, just thanking the creator, you know, bringing us together for one thing, and then help us all and take care of us, and not just us, everybody online and everybody out there in the world as well. All right, so I've chaired a couple of different committees, and in the past, I was, you know, the board chair for a large organization here in Bangor for a while. And one of the things I found as chair is that, you know, if we can stick to the agenda, that's great. I know in one of the meetings in the past that we kind of got off topic. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, before that we stick to the agenda, if we can do that. I certainly don't want to discourage anyone from talking about anything they want to talk about. But we will try to follow the agenda and move things as quickly as possible. I do have a hard stop at 4 o'clock because I have a granddaughter graduating high school today.
Oh.
So,
Congrats.
yeah, it's really exciting. Granddaughter high school. I'm old. So with that, we will talk about the minutes. And did
Yeah.
everybody get those minutes?
Yes. I would move to approve the minutes.
Second,
Maybe.
Any discussion about the minutes? From anybody online there? Robert? Should I call you Robert or Bert? I'm just kidding. Bert. Bert and James? How about Paul?
Oh, I don't have a vote.
No, do you have any comments on the minutes?
Oh, no,
We're not voting. No? Karen,
I think they're good.
you did what?
I think they're good.
Oh,
I'm into it. But I quibble. No.
so
I wouldn't pull it.
great, everybody's okay with the minutes, so we'll accept them as presented. And now we're gonna move into a financial report.
okay, yeah, this is Paul. As usual, I combined the financial report and the managing director report in one document, which was provided to you. And as is often the case, I would primarily rely on the written report. I do want to make, a couple of points on the financial report. So we're 11 months. We have this, the reports for 11 months of the fiscal year where the pattern is pretty much continued that we're somewhat under budget for the fiscal year. And we anticipate at this point, my best guess is we'll have a carryover into our fiscal year that starts July 1 of probably close to or at $70,000. So the pattern over the last few years is that our carryover has, been a little less each year. But we do expect to have some carryover in the next fiscal year. We're working on a budget for the next fiscal year. It is a little hard to do based on some of the uncertainties that exist. And in particular, I wanted to mention, and I guess it's in my managing director report rather than the financial report, but I am recommending that we make a change in terms of the office, of the physical office. We have explored the possibility of taking space across the road at the Cobscook Institute, with whom we've had a long relationship. We could realize some significant savings from making that move. It's a little hard to predict exactly, but I think conservatively we're looking at least $8,000 or $9,000 a year that we can save by making the move over there, because they're offering us, frankly, a very good deal in terms of space over there. Our lease is running, our current lease runs out at the end of June. And my recommendation is that instead of renewing the lease on the freestanding building that we have, that we go ahead and make the move over to Cobscook. The building has, become, well, frankly, it's become somewhat of an albatross around our necks, in the sense that there are a lot of issues you have to deal with just having a freestanding building. Currently I'm working remotely. So we don't even have, the building is full. We previously rented part of the building to another, nonprofit entity, but that hasn't been the case for a while. So we don't have that stream of income. We really have a lot of space over there. We have to heat. We're responsible for the heat, the utilities, the plowing, the lawn, mowing lawn and all of that, which not only costs money, but it also takes staff time to deal with just those issues of having a building, a freestanding building. And if we go into the Copswick space, we won't have any of those issues that we have to deal with. They'll be taking care of all those miscellaneous building related functions. So I wanted to mention that. It's on the agenda later as an actual item, but I wanted to bring it up. And otherwise, I guess that's all I would say about the reports, unless someone, both the financial and managing director reports, unless someone else has questions.
So Paul, when you say you're under budget, how much under budget, like percentage wise?
Well, I think it's on the year to date there, but I think I saw $29,000. I'm pretty sure that was the current amount that we were under budget for the year. So that's part of why we're going to have the carryover. The carryover will be a little bigger than it would have been if we were, if we weren't under budget on spending. And I think that the budget stuff is primarily still, and has been the case through the year, is where we've underspent, commissioner activities, because until recently we didn't have any in-person meetings. We've also underspent the projection on, we have a health reimbursement arrangement for employees, but we've substantially underspent on that. And I don't think that's going to change now. And I believe that we also had budgeted Rachel's position for the full year. She didn't come on until September, so there's kind of been an underspending built in on personnel for the whole year. So that's basically why we're under budget.
Right. And I know we talked a little bit, and we will have to look for some additional funding sources. Is that right? To maintain our level of effectiveness, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to get into all that right now, but
Okay.
as I've reported now for a few meetings, with the carryover and with one more year of extra state funding, our situation, we can continue the status quo into fiscal year 23, particularly with me now being part-time as opposed to full-time. But the longer term picture, it's clear that we can't sustain that level, especially that level of staffing, unless other things happen in terms of funding.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I don't know if others had questions, maybe online first.
Well, first, sorry I'm late. I thought the meeting was at 12:30, which was totally my fault. My apologies. Good to see everybody. And the second one question, I apologize if I missed this, but what's the cycle of our budget year, and what's the process for putting together a budget for the coming year?
Well, our fiscal year is July 1. It's the state fiscal year. We have in our statute, the MITSC statute, wasn't originally in there, but a number of years ago, a provision was added to the MITSC statute that specifically requires, or sets forth, that there will be a biannual budget meeting between the governor or the governor's designee and the tribal chiefs or their designees, and they will talk about the biennial MITSC budget. And that wasn't always observed in the past, but 2 years ago it was. And we anticipate again that this year we would have that meeting, and that would most likely happen in, my guess is late August, probably, is when they have those sorts of of the state has those kinds of meetings. So, so that in terms of externally, that's the statutory process. And of course, it's obvious from our budget documents that, you know, almost all of our current funding comes from state and tribal funds. We have a little bit of, you know, grant money this year, but historically, almost all MITSC funding has come from the governmental funding. Internally, we are, I think, as we have done in the past, we are already working with Pat Maller, who does, you know, our books, on trying to draft a budget for fiscal year 23. And I think the plan would be, as it has been in the past, that we would present that formally at the first meeting of the, you know, the new year, the new fiscal year.
So that would remain as a proposed budget until that point?
I'm sorry, say again?
I said that would remain as a proposed budget until that point, is that correct?
Until there's a meeting to actually, at least that's the way it's been done in the past. You know, during my time here and before that, the first meeting in the next fiscal year, they would adopt the new budget.
Great.
And as I alluded to, it's a little hard this year, maybe a little harder than normal, because we do have, you know, some things going on in terms of that are a little harder to project and predict. For example, the recommendation I just made that we make the change with respect to the building, and the uncertainty about whether the commission can move ahead with, you know, looking for a new director, and whether that would be full-time or not, because over the longer term, we unless we have other funding, we don't have the ability to maintain that staff ratio.
Yeah,
Just
to finish on that, if I can, this is probably super obvious, but comment, but of course, as Paul said, the state and the tribes will sort out how much revenue is coming our way, but then it really is up to us to decide how we want to allocate it. And that seems like a pretty important set of topics, including director, staff positions, and, you know, Rachel and others have brought forth really great ideas about how our role might evolve, and the money's there to support what we want to do. So I just think that's a topic that could use quite a bit of conversation. How do we want to spend the money we're likely to get? And periodically, it's fun to think about that with a blank slate. If we had no commitments and we're starting from scratch as a new organization in the next fiscal year, how would we spend our money? So I'd like to see us think about how we gear up to spend some proactive time on that subject. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So what you're saying basically is take a fresh look at what we're doing. And in part of my opening comments, I did say that, you know, as the state commissioners, tribal commissioners, the governor's office, and the tribal leadership, we all need to maybe reset a little bit and just find out, you know, what direction we want to go in and how we're going to get there. And I appreciate your comments on the financial report, and welcome also to the meeting.
Bert has a comment or question.
Great, Bert.
Yeah, a couple things. First, you know, my question would be, you know, where are we in regards to having something to propose, you know, in that biannual meeting that you know, that is supposed to take place, as you know, in regard to the budget, our funding that we get from the various governments. And then the other thing is I know in the past, I mean, for several years, we've talked about and I think there was attempts to find ways of creating, some kind of an income for the commission as far as, to aid in our budget, because, as we know, we've been working understaffed, with the things that we have, that we want to be working on. We are understaffed, even with the, with the managing director, and we have Rachel. You guys are doing a really good job, but there's areas that we should actually have other people in our staff to handle, and so that was my second question is where is that right now? Where do we stand in that regard? So first one, where we stand in as far as being ready to make some kind of a proposal to the chiefs and the government, and then the other one is where we stand on finding other avenues to meet our needs.
Well, Noel, should I make
Yeah,
a response
please, yeah.
to Bert's questions?
Thank you.
And those are really good questions, Bert. I think the first one, I think the process that the commission is engaged in right now, today, along the lines of Kevin was just talking about, it is going to inform what the commission brings to that biennial meeting between the chiefs and the state governor. Richard, in an administrative committee meeting not too long ago, Richard made a really good point that these two things, the things really go together. Asking for money and saying what you're going to do with it are kind of really tied together. So I think that's the short answer. Sort of administratively, internally, I think in the past what we've tried to do is have the administrative committee or other commissioners who volunteer to participate in getting ready for that biennial, meeting. And so I would hope that, similar thing would happen this year. And as far as the staffing goes, I would just, point out that we've been able to use, carryover money and the extra state funding basically allowed us to bring Rachel on board. We've also had the ability with that funds to have some contract work done. So we've been able to supplement the staff to some degree with, contract work because we had that extra money. But over the, over the longer term, that's not going to be, the case. So the ability to have contractors may be limited, or it may become a question of, do you keep using some contractors to do some work, but does that mean you have to retrench in terms of actual employee staff? So, I mean, those are fundamental questions and really good ones that Bert has raised.
We've also talked about using grant funds to pay those contracted, have a project-specific contracted labor.
Right, and I should have added that just as review, for some who may not recall it, we have in the last couple of years had conversations about particularly going out and getting more private funding. The statute allows MITSC to basically go get money wherever it can get it. We're not limited to government funding. Historically, MITSC hasn't had a lot of success attracting private funding or outside funding we've had some, and we currently do have a grant from Broadreach Fund. Cobscook serves as our fiscal sponsor because we are not a nonprofit entity. And so they wanted, Broadreach wanted us to have a fiscal sponsor. And a couple of years ago, we had a lot of conversation within the commission. Bob in particular was involved about whether we should look at creating an entity, parallel entity that is a nonprofit to make it a little easier for us to attract non-governmental funding. But there isn't anything per se that prevents us from seeking non-governmental funding now. It's just that we aren't a tax exempt nonprofit, so that some funders kind of, I think historically have shied away because we don't have that status. But it didn't prevent us from getting a grant from Broadreach with Cobscook, which is a nonprofit, as a fiscal sponsor. And there is a real possibility, I mean, I'd say a very real possibility that we can get an additional and larger grant from the Broadreach Fund without having to, convert ourselves into a nonprofit status. But as far as going out in a broader way, the question remains whether or not that would be facilitated if we actually had a nonprofit entity that was parallel to the commission.
Yeah, I think that's a bigger conversation, and I think Cobscook Institute is probably a good pass-through sponsor as well.
And based on, and I should add, based on the relationship we've had with Cobscook now for a time, I can't speak for them, but I anticipate that they would probably, and I think Rachel can comment on this, but I believe they would be willing to continue to, to be a fiscal sponsor for us, especially if we make this move and we're actually over there, renting space from them. I think that would only solidify that relationship.
Right.
I have a question. For the grant, did Cobscook take an indirect?
I'm sorry, say again?
Did they take an indirect, like 10% or something?
You mean, are they getting an administrative fee?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, very minimal.
Okay.
They gave us, what I would consider a very good deal on the administrative fee. $10,000 grant, $10,000 grant. They asked for 5%.
5%. Okay.
Yeah, and I think, well, any entity would do that.
Yeah. No, I'm just checking.
So back online, James, did you have a comment on the financials?
No, I'm all set. I completely agree with taking a fresh look at the budget heading into next year and then designing that budget around specific objectives that the commission seeks to achieve. So all good here.
Thank you. And Joey's back with us. Sorry, Joseph. Maybe.
Washington County.
Yeah. I know it well.
So if I might, Newell?
But yes,
I mean, make a suggestion in the context of this conversation. Maybe it is time to do something specific in terms of referring this to the administrative committee or deciding how else you all may want to, handle this, getting ready for the, not only for the biennial meeting of the governor and chiefs, but also just in the larger sense.
yeah, the 22-23 budget.
So do you want to refer that to the administrative committee, or do you want to form an ad hoc committee? I guess I'm just asking.
Well, who's on the financial administrative committee? Not that it matters.
There's a committee, if I hope I get it right now. Bert and Richard and Kevin, I think you're on it. And Sandy Yarmel. I believe those are the 4 members of the.
It sounds like a great team, and we will do that. We'll move that over. But I do want to entertain any comments if other people have any on our current agenda item.
Yes, as much to Paul as anything else. If we're to set up a meeting with chiefs and governor in the, to be by late August, don't we have to kind of get on that right now?
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, please.
Well, I mean, I don't know that we're late yet to get on it, but I mean, I know that the state finance people will be expecting to do that. I mean, they actually took the initiative the last time around. And they were willing to actually come to us or to any location we designated, you know, to do it, but COVID got in the way of that.
Who was that? What outfit?
The last time the governor designated the finance commissioner to be the person to do the meeting. I expect that probably would be the case again. Although the governor can do it herself if she chooses to. And on the tribal side, I do think that we need to do a little more prep to make sure that you know the chiefs make a decision whether they want to participate directly or who they might want to designate. Oftentimes they've designated the commissioners, the MITSC commissioners, to play that role. But it's the decision of the chiefs to make. So.
We have to propound the invitation or something to get it started. Nobody else will do it.
Yeah, I think particularly on the tribal side, we would need to take the initiative to remind the chiefs that we do have this state statute process. I shouldn't say state statute. It's the main implementing act process that kicks in every 2 years, and that it's up to the chiefs to decide if they want to directly participate in the meeting or whether they want to delegate either the commissioners or somebody else. They may want to delegate their own financial people to do it. That's for the chiefs to decide.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Paul, in that regard, I will be reaching out to them in the next couple of weeks as well.
Yeah.
Talk about broader issues, but.
Kind of going back a little bit on this budget question and setting the priorities. I guess it's just a question because I'm new to the commission. I know that there are specific statutory responsibilities for MITSC. And so that strikes me as sort of built into the puzzle. I mean, they're sort of vague, of course. They can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but I guess just in thinking about the budget and determining outcomes to drive the budget and, you know, products or whatever. I just want to, what's the balance like there in terms of, you know, is it always like you have, you know, certain amounts set aside for each of the statutory responsibilities, or you try to imagine what is done? I see Bob laughing at this. So, I mean, I guess it's not a very tight sort of role in terms of budgetary kind of framework to the actual responsibilities of MITSC.
Newell, you want me to try to respond to the question? That's a good question, Darren, and I think the answer is that it hasn't been done in a very formal way in terms of allocating to various responsibilities. I mean, the commission has generally had a work plan, and I guess it's just been understood that that work plan, the items in the work plan had to be doable within the available funds. On occasion, we've had specific discussions about whether the funds were available to take on projects that were being considered. I think of, for example, the fishing study that was specifically discussed at the time when the decision was made to pursue the fishing study. Commissioners brought up the specific question of the availability of funds. And at that time, we were able to say that because we had carryover funds, that we were able to afford to do that project. But it wasn't formalized in the sense of being written down in the budget. It was more a matter of discussions that occurred at meetings.
Yeah, that makes sense. It just as a response, it strikes me, and just in looking at some of these are, the responsibilities are like review the effectiveness of so and then a few of them are sort of hard to plan for because they're in response to tribal action. But then this one, studies, right, is probably the biggest one. That would be, I would imagine, also something the budget. I mean, that's the expense. It strikes me as sort of an ongoing expense to be considered. I'm biased because I'm a scholar and I love studies, but I think that is, in terms of the responsibilities, kind of an ongoing. And I imagine that the work plan is about that as well. So I think maybe that's.
Well, if I could respond, I mean, the work plan does set out sort of the priorities, the projects that the commission wants to pursue, but it doesn't have dollar amounts or anything like that.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Very, very good question.
Hands up.
So, all that being said, I'm thinking in lines of what we need to be doing. And I think Paul, and Rachel, maybe, we've had discussion in the past of what kind of staffing we would need in order to appropriately do our job effectively. And I know 2 staff members isn't going to cut it. And we acknowledged that in the past several times, actually. And so I think that if we formulate something saying, okay, a full-time managing director, Rachel, full-time at your job. But what about the other positions that we need in place? What it would take to cover that, and formulate some kind of an idea as far as what kind of a budget we need in order to maintain that, not just every now and then, but from here on in the future, in order for this commission to appropriately do their job and effectively do their jobs. So, that way, when we go and approach, the governor and all the chiefs, their representatives, as far as, this biennial meeting, we have something, that we can propose, and look, this is what we need in order to do what we need to do. So I think that needs to be done. If it hasn't already, I think you had something already going in that direction, Paul. So,
well, if I could comment, again, these are really good points that you all are bringing up. I mean, historically, I think, as most of you know, MITSC was chronically and massively underfunded. And for many, many years, MITSC had a minuscule budget. Gradually, some changes were made to increase, the state funding, and to somewhat increase the tribal funding, which got us to the base funding that we're at now. 2 years, last year, the state, agreed to provide 2 years of additional funding, with the idea that that would help us get the second employee. But even at that time, we were still telling them that, well, this is still a skeletal operation. So I guess I would agree with Bert that, the commission, there's a lot the commission could do if it had more people. We've been able to supplement that to some degree by using contractors. But that's still been on a relatively small scale. our contractor money this year wouldn't even add up, to one more employee. So that's been an ongoing issue. And for those who don't know, I think most of you probably know, but it was only a few years ago that MITSC was confronted with the fundamental choice of whether to pay for the Suffolk study or maintain the executive director. And the end result was that even the one person who was staffing the commission had to cut back to minimal hours because the commission was, had chosen to use the money to conduct that Suffolk study. Just pointing out that we've been in a relatively better situation in the last few years because of carryover and some extra state money, but the whole history has been scarcity for MITSC, and I think now we're looking at revisiting that basic problem of inadequate funding for MITSC.
Yeah, thanks all. So I think even historically thinking from my viewpoint is that, like you said, MITSC in the past was basically the executive director, and at one point, minimal hours for that executive director. And I think this is the first time that you've had two employees, to my knowledge. Maybe there was in the past, but I know there were other projects also, like even in the 90s, where they had some study groups and some contracted work done for MITSC. So I think it's a big step, and I think the administrative team probably can pull some stuff together. I'm hoping to take a harder look at that and see how we can fit pieces in, once we know what those pieces are.
Can I add something real quick? I just, I think that we need to really take this serious and hopefully, be able to project the need, of importance to increase ways, to increase our budget. Because, first of all, and I personally want to apologize to our staff because we have not done everything we can. We try, and we should always try to make sure that our staff that that keeps things going, keeps us all all abreast of the things that we need taken care of, that you shouldn't have to worry at all about how long you're going to have this job when it comes to your pay as an employee. So for me, I'd like to apologize if that has ever come into your mind, and I know it must have. So, but we as commissioners, owe it to our staff to make sure that we also reach out, to our respective governments and let them know that we need the appropriate funding. This is an important body that's put in place for a reason. I don't think that regardless of how things go as far as relations between the tribes and the state and how we see, and I know, kind of hinting on these questions of how we would evolve according to the current status, between tribes and state. That could be part of it. We still have an important part, statutorily. So anyway, I just wanted to add that real quick. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. I think Rachel had a comment.
I'll pass. I mean, Sarah maybe did too,
Sarah?
but Kevin's also has hand up, so.
Okay. Sarah,
I'll pass.
pass. Kevin,
You're muted, Kevin.
sorry. Just wanted to back up a minute again. Paul mentioned that, of course, a budget would be an expression of the action steps a group wishes to take. And I just don't know if we've had enough conversation about what is it that we'd like to accomplish in the next 2 years. If we want the next 2 years to be like the last two, that's easy. That's easy to plan for. But if we want the next 2 years to be the beginning of something different, that would really require, I believe, some pretty deep commissioner, all of us, discussion. And again, Rachel's been putting some really creative stuff forth. And for me, it really resonates. In my view, MITSC's been very politically focused. And it's my view that we're not super politically relevant. And I would either, if we're going to stay politically focused, I'd really like to talk about how we become more politically relevant. But my preference would actually be to broaden the mission. I would love to see us think about becoming more socially focused. What are the big, unique social challenges and opportunities facing the tribal communities? I'd love to see us consider becoming more economically focused. What are the unique economic development opportunities facing our tribal communities? And I'd like to see us become more educationally focused. How can bridges be gapped, awareness be heightened through education? I would really like to see a pretty radical shift in what MITSC tries to do. And I'm pressing this now because if we just kind of sign up for another 2-year budget of the same, I think that we've got something bigger and better than that in us.
No,
Yes.
I passed before, but Kevin just expressed some of the things that I was thinking. Item 6B on our agenda, old business, is the future role of MITSC. And I think we really need to talk about that because it's the programs and the activities that MITSC wants to pursue that will drive the requirements for funding.
Can I make my comment too?
Yes, please.
I just think I agree totally that it's the strategic planning and having a very strong vision that we can communicate of what we want to accomplish that is going to bring in the funding.
Right.
And there's so many projects that we could fund through grants, even if we can communicate what we want to accomplish. And I enjoy grant writing actually. So I just think, yeah, we're limiting ourselves the most by not being clear what we're even asking for money to do.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you, Kevin, Sarah, and Rachel, and everyone else for that matter. But I think part of my opening comments didn't hit that exactly, but I mean, that's kind of the things that I was looking at, what is the significance of MITSC and what can we do? I mean, there are a lot of social issues out there, especially affecting tribal entities and tribal communities. I was thinking about that this morning, actually, because I'm going to go to the Eastport Health Center to do a presentation there. And part of what I was going to talk about was even the, lifespan of natives versus non-natives, right? I'm already, 8 years beyond my life expectancy. So you have to speak up. So I can hear you. But, so those are the issues that are out there, or some of the issues that are out there, and, clean water. And that doesn't just affect tribal communities, that affects every community in the world. That's becoming more and more. We're talking, about Ukraine right now, that, the water is, they have a huge water issue. And we can't solve every problem, but we certainly can take a look at many, many issues and, collectively as a group, try to put something forward, that we all can agree upon that's going to affect each and every one of us, right? And equitably so. I mean, like I told you right up front that, these entities that make up MITSC, one is not any more prominent than the other. We're all in the same earth here. And we all have to take care of one another. And I know I'm relatively new to MITSC. And I'm relying a lot on Paul and Rachel right now to kind of bridge those gaps for me, to fill me in on, where you all have been. I won't say I was paying attention over the past 3 years, but, I was a little bit, but I want to be able to take some of the things that I'm thinking about, some of the things that you've already mentioned as well, and move those forward, and I don't know. I mean, we need to do that, right? We need to be able to develop a work plan for MITSC that, number one, we're all going to agree upon, but also something that is also attainable, that we can do it. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy I'm in the chair here finally. And moving into 22, 23, I'm hoping it's going to be a brighter future for MITSC and everybody we represent. Yes.
Sorry, wrong one. I hit the wrong
Oh,
button.
that was the right one, Bert. Keep that one going.
Oh, you want
them both.
Anyhow, just a quick note. I know we're still on the agenda for managing director report, and I think Paul, you do an awesome job. But I think in this discussion, about elements of the managing director's report, we're already starting to touch base on some of the things that we have on our agenda, going into old business as well as new business. So I might suggest, Newell, that maybe we might start moving on with it if Paul's already done with his report.
I'm good with that. Bert?
I am done with my report.
Any final comments? Nope, so we'll move on to old business. And we're going to hear about the fishing study. I think that is Mr. Ken.
I'll start off and then take any questions.
Excuse me, I'm going to get out of your way, so I'm not up to your.
So the primary thing I've been doing since the last meeting, there was some suggestions about the study itself, and I have not done another major rewrite. So the draft you have is pretty much the same thing as exists. But one of the recommendations we had suggested was to list salmon as an endangered species in the state listing, because the state can do that as well as the federal government, which did it back in 2000. So I started looking into the practical reasons for and against listing salmon as an endangered species at the state level. And the astounding thing was that there's a fair amount of discussion you can find about it, but it was unconvincing to me that these were really people's reasons. It really came down to saying, well, it's symbolic to name salmon as an endangered species because it is in fact endangered, and it sort of states a policy priority. But there were very few specifics about what it would do in terms of money, practical steps, etc. And the counter arguments were primarily, well, it wouldn't add anything of practical benefit, and it would cause the state an administrative burden to list it, which flies directly in the face of the way the state describes its process of naming different species to the endangered list, which is to do it solely by science, and then you look at what you can do to actually manage, what programs you can do to manage environmental species. So I sent a memo out, and hopefully people had a chance to read it a little late, that basically goes over that. The only things I've been able to see that might really be practical issues is that if a species is named endangered, the state can manage it by setting aside critical habitat, and that can have a real impact on landowners, riparian owners, whatever, depending on what your critical habitat is. And so I included a little blurb I found in an Audubon Society submission to the state that said, yes, this is an issue, but we've always worked on it, and I don't think it's changed any projects. You know, the other little things about whether recreational anglers might mistake juvenile salmon for other trout type species didn't impress me as a major issue. And some of the people who in favor of listing say that it'll help with coordination with federal government. And the state says, well, we already have these cooperative agreements and we're working very closely with the federal government. There might be some impact on other state agencies and in relations with other state agencies. But I didn't see anything. So anyway, that's what I found. The reason I put the recommendation in originally was simply because salmon is an endangered species. And when you look at the difference between salmon and, say, lynx, which is another of the species that comes up when you start talking about endangered species. Lynx are endangered in the United States, so they're listed federally as an endangered species. But actually, Maine is the place where lynx are doing the best, so there would be a question of whether Maine would list lynx as an endangered species. Salmon are, again, struggling everywhere. In fact, Atlantic salmon, Maine is the only place that has any natural Atlantic salmon left. And they are really struggling. So anyway, I thought I'd bring up that. Glad to take any questions about that or questions, comments, et cetera, about the study itself.
Thank you, Judge. Would it be a fair statement to say that designating a species as endangered only calls on marine resources or inland fish and wildlife to do what they want to, basically?
That seems to be the way the statute is written. Once the species is designated, the agency has pretty much full discretion about what it does to manage that issue, dependent upon resources, staffing, all those.
Does a designation give the administrative agency more power than it would otherwise?
It certainly would. I mean, once you designate a species, the agency can take steps that it wouldn't otherwise take. And that's where designating, say, critical habitat might come in. The way I understand it, and I'm fairly that would be, the agency would make that designation. And then there are various things that flow from that, but I don't think the agency is required to make that designation, even if a species is named on the list, it's named.
So question, one of the questions I have, just thinking about that, so you like saying that, so the links are listed as endangered or federally?
Federally, but
So
not
do
in the
individual states have the right to not list them?
Yes, most states have an Endangered Species Act. I think they probably all do on the state level. The states can list them or not. Doesn't change the federal designation of what the federal government is doing, but it can change what the state is doing. When the state act was originally passed, this is going back probably almost 40 years. Originally, the state statute said the state had to list any federally listed species that were in the state of Maine. Okay. That got changed, I think, in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, and now the state just lists what it wants on its own list. There are a number of species that were grandfathered from that original list when the first state act was passed, that were already on the federal list, and hence were essentially grandfathered onto the state list. And they're still there, some marine species. But after that, more recently, the state has authority of what it lists and what it doesn't. But it still has to comply with any federal directives about a species that's federally listed. Is that clear?
No.
Why do we have all these different governments in this country? I don't know.
Just a comment.
Go ahead.
And I brought this up last time. The studies I'm aware of show that state listings can lead to habitat protection, and that's the benefit to why the state probably should, in my opinion, should list it. Just a little bit of the federalist system that only West Virginia and Wyoming have no endangered species laws. So we love those states for their freedom, of course. And then Maine is in a category where there is a fairly direct correlation with what could be considered an endangered species with the federal law. So there's a lot, and that's I believe it's 32 states have sort of that arrangement, whereas the other, if I can do the math, so the other 16 states that they only protect wildlife in their endangered species laws. So 32 states mimic the federal law, all species kind of included. 16 states only for wildlife, basically, and then the 2 states, West Virginia, Wyoming, have nothing. But if you look at the studies, I mean, the more aggressive states like Washington, some others, when they do state listings of species, that can lead to habitat protection, and that's the source of my advocacy. Because I think habitat, and I think it's really consistent with the duties of MITSC in terms of what we're supposed to do under Section C or Part C of our duties in terms of advocating for these policies that protect fish and wildlife stuff. So that to me, that between that duty and what I understand from the research, and I think this is sort of what you're everything. It's not, the state of Maine doesn't have to protect habitat. That's the thing. And as Jed mentioned, there isn't like a predetermined set of actions. It's supposed to be based on science. And best available, there's some language there that determine the kinds of things in fisheries or whatever.
I would make one more point I forgot to mention. I think the issue of salmon habitat, stream beds, et cetera, the dams issue would expand well beyond, I mean, there's already the process, the FERC process that you'd have to go through for any hydroelectric dams. There are plenty of dams that are not hydroelectric dams, that are state regulated or not regulated dams. There's some state-owned dams. And dams can have a big effect on salmon habitat and spawning habitat.
Any migratory fish. Hold on a second, Bert. I don't know if Judge was finished.
Yeah, that was.
Okay. All right, Bert.
You know, I here I read I have this thing in front of me, reading it, and you know I've been reading it, and I know the discussion we had last meeting in regard to what our thoughts were in regard to listing them on endangered species list for the state, and as far as I'm concerned, I won't back down. In my thoughts, I don't. Personally, I don't care about the administrative burden that it might cause when it comes to, the state government and their departments, because, first of all, how did we get here? How did we get to this position? It was because of the lack of, initiative in protecting the environment in a way, in the way we have, now, fish such as salmon, and other wildlife for that matter, from becoming endangered. The fact, that's how they became endangered in the first place, is lack of responsibility. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I hold the state and their policies responsible for the fact that we do have endangered species here, in the state of Maine. The administrative burden. Why is it considered an additional administrative burden? Over all the other things that they have. These departments have responsibility to take care of. Is it because they don't want to make these corporations or these landowners responsible caretakers in doing what they need? Whatever their industry or whatever their thoughts are in regard to ownership of land or resources. This affects everyone in the state of Maine. It is, and as far as I go, I take it personally because it affects a relative to the indigenous people. These are things that we have relied on historically, and I know, we don't have to look at it just on the historic part, but what about the future? I want to be able to go out and fish. I want to be able to go out and get that salmon and feed myself and my family and loved ones, or even my neighbors. So I think that we need to make sure, we need to do what we can to instill responsibility in, amongst all of the citizens of the state of Maine. That includes, all landowners, that includes any corporation, any corporate entity that wants to do business in the state of Maine. So administrative burden, what about public burden? The burden that's placed on civilization in the state of Maine. That I think is a lot more important than anyone in any of those departments to worry about, how much harder it's going to be to do their job. So, that's what I have to add to that. You know, I know like I said, we had a long discussion and there was pros and cons and there, you know, but I can't back down. And I don't think any of the tribes could back down. And I don't think anyone that truly loves and cares for the state of Maine, you know, I don't think should ever back down. We need to make sure that the state does their job to make sure that everyone in the state of Maine is taken care of. And that includes our wildlife, all of our natural resources. Utilize them, yes. But you need to protect them in order to utilize them. Chief Leland.
So, I mean, I missed the broader discussion that you've had before in the past, and I see the report. And I know you and Tony worked on this together. And I'm sure you consulted with tribal fisheries.
In doing the study, yes.
Yes, right, in doing the study. And then IFNW and DMR.
I talked at length with Sean Ledwin, who's with DMR and is in charge of the fish issue.
Mhm.
He didn't respond to my emails to talk about the listing
of endangered
issues. This recently.
And I don't know if anyone remembers the call we had on the report, but do we discuss that during that call? I don't recall.
I don't know if we had the recommendations.
Okay,
Yeah, the recommendations came later
So-
in the process.
so what is the commission's will here? What are we looking for? Are we looking for a specific movement?
Zeke's had his hand up.
Okay, sorry, Zeke.
Well, that's what I would have suggested. I think it seems like we're split on this. I agree with Bert. I think Darren and Sam last meeting said some very convincing points. And I think is a vote appropriate for this?
Well, I wouldn't say not at this point, but
Perhaps it's just a point of order. Who makes the determination? We can recommend placement on the endangered species. Who actually has the gavel on that?
The gavel is first to the commissioner of either the IFW or the resources,
and/or,
depending on the type of species. And there is some,
well, they're both.
yeah, there's, I don't think, it's not a turf war, but it's almost like a turf gap sometimes. Surf and turf war. So the commissioner of the relevant agency needs to recommend that a species be listed, and then the legislature has the last word on whether to list or delist species. But the legislature doesn't do any management plan, and doesn't do the research to recommend it.
Yes, Sarah.
This has been the subject of discussion for many years, and there have been proposals before to list salmon. I'm of the opinion that there is no specific gain to listing it as a state endangered species. I think that the federal coverage with the federal people working with the state people and with them all working with the landowners on a cooperative basis is where we should stay. Listing it would maybe create a little bit of more awareness if it's both on the federal and state list. But I think in most people's opinions, a federal listing trumps state listing anyway. So the fact that it's listed on the federal register shows its significance. The administrative burdens that we're talking about are not just to the state, they're also to any landowner who may own land along the major rivers or their tributaries, because all of this from the headwaters down contributes to the health of the river and the species. We already have laws. We have town zoning laws, DEP laws, Maine Land Use Planning Commission laws and, and other things that protect the shorelands. In addition to that, when this was all discussed previously, landowners agreed to continue to cooperate with both state and federal fisheries biologists. And I don't know if we still have it, but the Atlantic Salmon Commission, there was a group called SHARE, which was a stream enhancement group, and landowners have all been putting effort and money into rebuilding culverts and bridges and making sure that ATVs aren't running through streams and things like that. And we follow the laws about timber harvesting within 250 feet of a major river, 50 feet of a stream. And in many cases, the landowners have voluntarily expanded that to a 320-foot riparian buffer. It doesn't mean that there's no harvesting. It means that there's minimal harvesting to keep the forest healthy. And so I think that all of these cooperative efforts, when you think about it, we've got 10.5 million acres of forest land in the state. Many of the landowners are families, many of them are investment organizations, many of them are groups like the Nature Conservancy and the state of Maine that are all working together to do this on a voluntary basis. And when you think about how we all like to work with people, I'd much rather work with somebody who says, let's figure out how to do this together, than go ahead and do it, rather than have somebody come to me and say, you have to do this. The example I like to use is don't put mud in the river. I can choose whether I need to build a bridge, put a culvert in, plant it along the bank or whatever, but I can figure out how best to use following best management practices to keep mud out of the river. And I think the same thing is true with the salmon, that we can continue to work together to try to protect salmon habitat, and that way free up money that would otherwise have to go into enforcing rules or doing studies or whatever. IFNW has a limited budget and they've got a whole lot to do. It used to be that they just focused on fish and wildlife game species, and now they're looking at everything from, you know, little butterflies to salmon to moose to whatever. And I would rather see them put their efforts into something that wasn't already taking care of itself. So I would say that I think this report is great, and I would like to see MITSC do more such reports, because this report is informative and it presents the whole background, showing us what how we got where we are, and then anybody that looks at it, whether it's legislators or citizens or whomever, can look at the background and then make decisions on how we proceed from here. So I think the report is wonderful, but I would really have a hard time endorsing it with this recommendation. All of the other recommendations are okay. So I would say, for the sake of unity among this group, to take out this one recommendation. And if the tribes want to pursue listing, that's their prerogative. But I'm pretty sure no landowner in the state of Maine would want to pursue it.
Okay, so I have a question. Like I said, I haven't been involved in the discussions all that much. So why would landowners not want to be?
Because of the administrative burdens.
To the landowner?
Yes. If federal says federal designation of habitat, then we would probably have to get permits in order to harvest. And if we already know how to harvest without hurting salmon habitat, why do we have to go through the whole process?
Harvest salmon?
Timber. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to finish up. So you're saying that would be the sentiment of a majority landowner?
Yes, I'm sure it is. We already have rules and best management practices to follow in order to harvest timber, to build roads that cross streams, and we keep our roads out of the stream zone other than crossing. But we already are doing that and protecting the salmon and doing it. If it were to be listed as endangered habitat by the state, the next step would logically be that some sort of permit is required. And it's the administrative burden of getting the permits, because you apply for a permit and then the agency has to send it out to a bunch of people for review, different other agencies and interested parties. They have to wait for all the comments to come back. And then they have to address any concerns, whether they're legitimate or not. One time we got a comment back about it might be an archaeological site. We had to hire an archaeologist to go out and look at the site, and it was not an archaeological site. So there's all this process that you have to go through that takes time and money. That is.
But the end result's gonna be the same.
The end result's gonna be the same. That's my point. I don't see any specific benefit to the salmon. And the other thing about salmon that's a little bit different than some other species, I mean, if we were talking about turtles on the St. John River, that might be different. It's a very specific thing. But these salmon, these anadromous salmon, have things all along. What happens to them out in the sea, what happens to them at the mouth of the rivers when the seals eat them on the way in. I mean, there's so many things that affect the salmon that I don't think having this administrative burden on either the landowners or a state agency that is already stretched very thin makes sense when there's so many other things that we should be putting our effort into. And I'm sure that the entire forest products community would feel the same way.
So, and just to follow up with my question, so everything would be the same, whether there was a listing of endangerment or not. But why would that be a problem if there were, then that permitting process would be a safeguard to say that is being done. Otherwise, it could be circumvented. Is that correct?
Otherwise, it could be circumvented.
Yeah, some landowner could say, well, no,
Well, not really, because we have, there are rules for harvesting within 250 feet. And you can't put anything in the rivers. I mean, you can't, when you make a crossing, you have to do it properly. You have to put rocks on the banks, or, and if you're building something in the stream, you have to put in like a cofferdam. I mean, we already have rules, and I can't think of any rules above what we already have, except that it could be get a permit instead of doing it by the rules. And there are people out there that are watching, the Land Use Planning Commission, DEP, all of these organizations, citizens. If they see something that is wrong, they will report it. So every once in a while you see a news article about a timber harvester or a landowner who has done something wrong. It's usually not the big timber landowners. Once in a while it is, but it's very, very rare. It might happen once a year in all. So I think there's enough awareness among the landowners and the state agencies to be looking out for these things. And it's not just the salmon. It's, like I mentioned, the wood turtle on the St. John, is it the wood turtle? It's turtle on the St. John River. And so now we're making our management plans to harvest in seasons when we're not likely to disturb the turtle. There are so many things that you have to take into account. Bats is another one. We can't harvest in certain areas when the bat babies might be in the trees. It wouldn't add anything in Maine to add bats to the endangered species list, because I mean, the US Fish and Wildlife Service has already given the protocols for dealing with bats, and we're doing it. It's white nose syndrome that's killing them, not cutting down their habitat. So this, it's just that one thing on top of another.
I got it. So the one recommendation on the fishing report is engagement, listing is engagement.
That's one of the recommendations.
And what's the benefit? So I wanna
The
hear that.
benefit seems, well, the benefit seems to be primarily a priority statement, okay? There may be different ways that the state can interact with the federal government, although the state is pretty heavily enmeshed with the federal government on salmon issues right now. There may be intra-agency issues within the state that would be trumped by a salmon listing. For example, the IFW is involved in stocking for recreational fishing. I'm not sure exactly what they're stocking, but bass is a problem for the survivability of salmon. Okay?
Mhm.
Bass are a non-native fish.
Right.
And I don't know that EMR and DIFW want to go head to head with who does what to the bass to let the salmon back in. That may be an issue, but no one's expressed it in that way in any of these debates. I would say that to Sarah's point, if an area of land or stream, et cetera, is listed as essential habitat, there are permitting requirements that attach immediately by law. No state, local entity can issue a permit without review. So
Because of the federal endangerment?
No,
Or just
this
because
would be-
because that's the process.
Right, that's, if the state lists salmon as an endangered species, the agency can choose whether to designate certain land as essential habitat. If they do, then there are permit requirements that come with it. That makes sense?
Yes. Karen?
Yeah, so to that last point, in the studies I'm aware of, state listing can lead to habitat. That's why I'm supporting it. Also, and I appreciate your balancing act between landowners and tribal, non-tribal interests, except that that's not what we're tasked with doing in this particular situation. In our bylaws, section 2, part C, says the commission shall make recommendations to the Maine Commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and the Maine legislature with respect to implementation of fish and wildlife management policies on non-Indian lands. And this is the key part, in order to protect fish and wildlife stocks on lands and water subject to regulation by the tribes. Doesn't say consider landowners, doesn't say consider administrative burden. It says we shall do this. And so while I appreciate the role of balancing, that's really not up to us. It's up to inland fisheries, which you said is already burdened and has this role to kind of figure out how to do that work. Our work is to do this, protect fish and wildlife stocks. And so the logic of saying the landowner this and the landowner that, that's not the role of the MITSC. So if your landowner associations want to advocate against it, I think our role is to advocate to protect fish and wildlife stocks. That's what it just says that we have to do.
Yeah, I understand that. So there's, what it comes down to me is following the letter of the statute or practicality. Yes, we could recommend that. The practical side of me says that what the landowners and the state have been doing collectively to improve fish habitat outweighs that slap to the landowners, because it's saying, yes, the law says we need to protect habitat, so we're gonna list it, we're gonna protect the habitat. To heck with what you've been doing, doesn't matter. So,
I mean, just,
yeah,
there's just, can I respond to that?
yeah, sure.
There's just so much strong evidence that these voluntary systems are not as effective. And I raised the issue of the Medusa keg last time. There was a pay for landowners to do setbacks and manage agricultural lands with best practices. When they stopped getting paid, even though there were all these incentives otherwise, they went and got rid of all the setbacks and then put nitrogens into the Medusa keg, and it looks like a golf course with all the algae. So I'm just not convinced that these programs for volunteerism, and that's just the one that comes to mind as a huge failure, work in the same way that the evidence shows in other states where state listing can protect habitat. So that's just my only. I'm trying to go with science here, you know, and I understand practicality. I'm not dismissing that. It's just that practicality consideration is not what we're tasked with doing here. Section 2, Part C.
I want to see if there's any comment from the online.
Bert's has hand up.
Go ahead, Bert.
Thank you. I agree with Darren. Darren said it probably better than I can. Evidently, there's not enough being done, whether it's by voluntary means, because our salmon is still endangered, and so I think I really think that there's a lack. Okay, yes, a lot of the landowners might keep themselves aware and do practice protocols that might not add to that endangerment, but evidently not everybody's going by that. And like Darren said, that leaves it kind of open, but before I go on, or before anything else, I'm going to make a motion that we submit a recommendation to add the salmon on the endangered species list. I'm making that motion now.
Looking for a second?
First, motion and a second. Thank you. So I think any other online comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say I largely agree with Sarah, and I think there's maybe there's some misinterpretation or misunderstanding about where we're coming from. I don't think anybody is looking to move to a voluntary effort on its face. That's not the situation that we're in. We're already in a situation, and we're going to continue to be, where salmon is a federally listed species. So there is a tremendous amount of good work happening on a voluntary basis. But there is also a heck of a lot of regulatory process and regulatory obligations associated with the federal listing that I agree are likely to, in almost all cases, trump what the state itself would do in its own listing. There was a comment made about following the science. At this point in time, I'm unaware that we have any agency scientists, biologists in the fisheries realm that are making this recommendation. I would concede that sometimes politics comes into play with that, but our Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, as well as other agencies, DMR and the federal agencies, have never been bashful about contradicting the wishes of landowners, large or small, when that's what the science is showing, and they're not stepping up to make that recommendation. I guess where I'm coming from is it seems as though this issue in particular is maybe a bit more contentious amongst this group than I thought it might become. And in what I'm looking for is what a state listing specifically would offer over and above the federal listing that isn't already occurring on the ground or in the water, I should say. And in lieu of that, I would just say respectfully, I'm unconvinced that the state listing would do anything to enhance what is already being done. And I think until we have those specifics, we've referenced what landowners may or may not be doing, but we don't have any specific evidence in front of us. There is no case study in front of us. And so I would be voting respectfully in opposition to the motion.
Thank you, James.
Can I respond? He just said something that was inaccurate. The former head of the Department of Inland Fisheries has come out in favor of listing the state salmon. And I could forward that information to you, as well as 3 or 4 studies that show that state listings enhance habitat.
Can we hear a little bit more about that? Like how far back does that go? And if IF&W says put it on the endangered list and it goes to the legislature, or does DMR get a vote? Or
Yeah.
how does that work?
Yeah.
DMR would have to recommend salmon because they're under DMR's purview. But they would have to recommend to the legislature, and the legislature would have to vote.
So IF&W's recommendation doesn't mean anything. It's just
Yeah, I mean, and it's a former person. I'm just saying that he made it sound like no one from the regulatory.
It's a former person who made it in his capacity as the director
No,
or as a
after,
citizen?
as a
Okay,
citizen.
afterwards, all right.
In the last go round with the legislature was whether to require by legislation that all federal species in Maine be listed in the Maine listing. There were multiple groups and individuals in favor, including Buck Gillis. There were, all kinds of groups. There were against were the IFW and DMR, and I think the Forest Council and the Guides Association. There may have been a couple of other individuals. The list of those in favor was long and was a pretty good list that is available in the footnote that I put in. But the two state agencies have remained against this all along, whether it's just a request or whether it's proposed legislation.
So I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Bob. No, please.
It's beginning to look as if this is starting to break state and tribal, which is the worst thing in the world, but it may add gravity and peril. I am not a wildlife biologist, but I used to fish for salmon on the Miramichi 30 years ago, 35 years ago. I brought my son to fish with me 15 years ago, and there was nothing left. I mean, I read the sporting literature, not the scientific literature, where the species is critically endangered. I'm not yet persuaded that it would be a good idea for MITSC to propound a recommendation. Although I think, I'm not getting ahead of myself, everybody supports the body and content of the report. I am reluctant to sign on. Let me back that up a bit. I think the native and state delegations are looking at slightly different issues. The native, if I may, say, well, do we want to protect the salmon or not? I'm thinking, is this a good decision for MITSC to make or not? I fear that although relations between the state and tribes have improved greatly over the last 2 years, one of the criticisms that's been made of the state's effort to meet that's all symbolic. Indigenous Peoples' Day, that was all symbolic. Don Geller's part, that was symbolic. If we're not going to do anything substantive, then let's not mess with the symbolics of it. not because it won't salmon upstream, but because more of the people in the state government will say, oh, that's MITSC again. You know, they're just doing something symbolic, not substantive. That said, I'm still open to persuasion. What I'm looking for is what exactly would it accomplish? MITSC to make that recommendation. If MITSC makes the recommendation, it goes to the MR, which then gets to decide whether it dies there or goes to the legislature. And if it goes to the legislature as approved, then there will be added protection to habitat, right, which would make itself felt by need for more permitting activities along the shoreline, which may or may not be done voluntarily. I mean, I don't want to take an action that's not really going to have an effect.
That's not what I'm hearing, Bob. I mean, I'm hearing from Sarah and Darren and Bert, James. And what I'm hearing is that there's not going to be an additional burden. I think even though they're saying it differently, I'm kind of hearing the same thing, right? Because whether it's listed or not, or whether MITSC makes that recommendation or not, it's not going to change the way things are done. You're going to have to get a permit maybe, right? If that's what I'm hearing correctly. But it's the same, people want the same thing, right? And I think the permit is just a paper that says, this looks good, right? So when I was 14 years old, I could drive, but I also couldn't because I needed that paper that said I could, right? So I think a lot of times it's like things happen and people understand conservation. They understand that the right thing to do is to get these setbacks, to build those bridges correctly and do these things right, right? And I also don't think that an issue like this, hopefully, is not going to tear MITSC apart, because I don't think that's where we want to go. And I think each of us are mature enough to say, okay, even though, you know, maybe it doesn't go away or it does go my way, you know, that's not the end of our charge here, right? We have other things also that are out there. But I do have another question as well. So what's the clock on this? What's happening if this does not go through?
You mean in terms of the report?
The report in total.
Well, the report, Tony's doing a couple more interviews he has set up with native people. And that's like one of the last input things we're looking for. And I've got to go through the report with a more final edit. And there were some suggestions made at the last meeting. Other than that, it's ready to come out. And as I've always said, the recommendations are really up to MITSC. I mean, I gave a list of suggested recommendations that I thought of, and this one I didn't spend enough time thinking about because it's a bigger issue than I thought. But anyway, the recommendations are totally MITSC's to make. I have no horse in that game, and all it means is I take something out and renumber or leave something in and don't renumber.
So my question is, so these recommendations don't get made today? Is there a clock that's ticking somewhere that says if we don't do this right now,
No.
things are gonna like?
No. You can delay it or have it come out as soon as you want. I mean, I personally like to see it come out fairly soon because I've spent a long time. You know,
Right.
it's time to give birth, if you know what I mean.
I understand, then you don't want it sitting there collecting dust as well.
Right.
And I appreciate the comments, and I just want to say that I'm new, and it's new to the chair. I would like some more time to review in more detail. You know, we had the discussion, I think that was 6 weeks ago,
Yes,
the meeting online. I mean, I was there on the phone.
or natural resources.
Yeah. And who's on that committee? I I know Sarah was there.
Sam. the
Sam,
other
okay,
commissioner
yep.
for Holden.
Joey? Joey here? Yes. I don't know, Joey, did you have any comments?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one for me too. I have a hard time when it comes to stuff, when it comes to protecting a resource. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Our tribes tend to put stricter regulations than non-tribal people do on protecting resource. But when we decide, or we want to do something that's protecting the resource, there's always an excuse why not to do it. And it's frustrating when you know that the issue at hand is because of people not protecting it correctly, or people poisoning the rivers. You know, it's a tough pill for me to swallow when I hear this stuff. It's really frustrating when you know that it's about protecting big companies. It's not about protecting people. And I support this, and I support what Bert said earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Sarah?
Just like to throw one thing out for consideration. We have a report which we've all reviewed multiple times and we agree on. We have several recommendations that we all agree are appropriate recommendations. This is one recommendation where there's a split. Is it necessary for MITSC to make that recommendation? Or would it be better for MITSC to leave out that recommendation and have a unified group that's behind the entire report? I would say that each of the tribes could submit a letter to the Department of Marine Resources, or the tribes together could submit a letter to the Department of Marine Resources. Cite the report and say, based on this, we as tribes would like to see the state adopt salmon as an endangered species. That would allow James and I, and I'm sure there are others of the same persuasion, to not have our names on a report that has or not have our names, but not be associated with MITSC, with the report that has a recommendation that we are strongly against. I would rather see all of the recommendations that we can all agree upon be in a report and present it with a unified front. It's kind of like if you have a big bucket of blue marbles and there's one red one in. Half the people want to take the red one out and half don't. What do? You just take the red one out, get rid of it, then you can all agree on the blue. And I know that doesn't address your issue, Darren, of doing the ultimate to protect and to address the letter of the law, but it doesn't say we absolutely have to make a particular recommendation.
No, it just says that we shall protect fish and wildlife
Right.
stuff.
Right, and if we are 99% there with the report, without that one recommendation, and we can all agree on it, I would love to see MITSC be able to go with a unified front, present this report and say, this is a report that we commissioned, we are all behind it, and then move forward.
Obviously, I mean,
Well, I know you
I don't
disagree, but-
understand how you can say you're doing this protection if you don't do the thing that might lead to more protection.
But that's a catch. It might. We don't know for sure that it will.
Well, the evidence is strong. I mean, I would say that state listings lead to habitat protection. I'm convinced by it. I mean, you aren't. I don't know what papers you're reading about it, but there's 3 or 4 that I think, are pretty convincing. But you're basing it not on science, that's what
Oh,
I'm
I
saying.
am, I
You're
am.
basing it on your interest with landowners. No, well, that's what you said.
Well, that's
You're
true.
balancing landowners with habitat and all of that. So I'm trying to say, we're not supposed to balance all those things. We're supposed to protect the fish and wildlife stuff.
But there's no science that says listing will protect them. The science is how you treat the streams and how you treat the banks and the trees and things like that. And there are laws that we are following, rules and regulations based on that science that are protecting the
Well,
the salmon.
I'm referencing science as studies that show when states list, when there's a state listing, that enhances habitat protection. I mean, that's what I'm thinking about, but again, I don't, maybe, I mean, to Bob's point, maybe MITSC's role isn't to wander into things where we won't immediately have a direct effect. I mean, you're trying to weigh the effectiveness of making this action versus an outcome. And maybe that's the purpose of MITSC, is to be strategic in that way. I mean, I'm not reading that in our bylaws, but maybe that's the way we do our work. And so maybe that's the best way.
Yeah, Bob, to address that too, I think if this recommendation was just symbolic and meaningless, people wouldn't so passionately oppose it. I think I don't think that's accurate.
I wasn't expecting that, or expecting the other one. Oh, am I being recognized? Yeah, I'm gonna try not to go too far afield, but I may have to just to make myself understood. I think based partly on our experience with the task force and LD 66, I've come to the view that MITSC is most effective when it operates by consensus, and that divided reports, I mean, everybody else can disagree. They don't need us to disagree. I would like to think that we can, first of all, our work product is what Judd has done before you get to the recommendations. Recommendations are sort of a mixed bag policy that's in our bailiwick. The legislature gets the ultimate call, PMR. And as I think those things through, I thought I heard the chair call for forward deliberation, which might be in order. There's another, use the phrase, arrow in our quiver. When we have a study like this on the table, you can get mileage out of it without even reaching a conclusion by jawboning people at DMR, governor's office, the legislature. I guess would be IF and W rather than judiciary. But you can make a lot of progress towards getting the result you want to accomplish. I mean, say behind the scenes, but behind the scenes, one possibility that could come out of this would be a report that agrees on everything and drops this debate into a footnote and said, well, here's where we divided. Tribal representatives thought this because of that. State commissioners, we haven't heard from Kevin yet, thought this because of that. You can make your own decisions. I think what we've got is the science and the work done in the study itself. What icing we put on it may be less important. Then when you go farther afield, at the risk of maybe taking some time away from our further discussion, one thing that has occurred to me about the organization is that it has been so kind of amorphous and hard to handle and just odd because it is so unique. I think many other states have state offices, tribal offices that are designated liaisons, various degrees of authority. This is the only one I found anywhere that has a composite delegated body, any kind of decision making. Given that background, we certain amount of pride in the fact that despite a history of discord, that those of us who are now serving have done 3 years without a single dust up or public spectacle. Nobody has embarrassed any of our governments. We have gotten along famously during the last year. But I think we can, as Stool said, we'll get past this one. This is just another book.
Right, so, I mean, I'm,
Oh, come up, dump another game.
Joey.
what do you think?
He said it's going to another game.
Oh. Hey, Paul, did you have any comment at all?
Well, I think this is very much, a matter for the commissioners to thrash
In
out.
a different division. They're
Pardon?
playing in the quarterfinal. They're probably the 2 teams who should be playing in the final, but because of Hill point standards, Matthias is fourth and.
Can I mute a single person?
Yeah.
If you're,
One's gonna lose out to get the finals. Literally, they are the best 2 teams. They get the best pitching staff, both of them.
He's talking about the Red Sox now.
heard people say worse on hot mic.
Yeah.
Just remind me to unmute him soon.
Well, he can do it himself.
Okay, he can.
Yeah, he can do it if he wants.
No,
Sorry, Paul, thanks.
no, it's okay. I mean, I guess my first comment is I really think this is an issue for the commissioners to thrash out. But to the extent that, staff input is, or useful, I guess, I do think that consensus has been a strength of MITSC. And I do agree that consensus report would be preferable. I look at the example of the unanimous support on the commission for the amicus briefs supporting the position of the Penobscot Nation and the federal government regarding the Penobscot River case. I think that was remarkable that, and impactful that all the members of the commission agreed with that. But I do think there are times when, by the nature of the commission, you're not gonna all agree. And I don't think that should necessarily prevent the commission from going forward with votes, but consensus is definitely valuable. My initial thought when Judd summarized his memo, I guess my initial thought was that the MITSC recommendation would only effectively be encouraging the department commissioner to take a step to recommend something to the legislature. And even if the legislature enacted it, it still comes back to the department to decide what to do about it. So it seemed to me that given what I understand, and I may be wrong, but it's my understanding that a lot of different groups have recommended this step of listing, salmon, and I don't think there's any factual dispute about the extreme endangered nature of salmon. And since the commissioner doesn't have to do anything, I don't see MITSC as being like way out there in left field or anything by encouraging the listing as numerous other groups have done. That's my thought. But
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, so it's not the end of the line, even if MITSC was to make a recommendation. But I want to hear from Richard and Kevin as well. Richard?
I didn't raise my hand.
No, but I'd like to hear from you if you have some comment. If you don't have anything, that's fine too.
Well, first of all, this has been one of the best discussions around an issue since I've been on the commission. It's just really, it's been substantive, and the exchange has been really good. I think that when I was in the legislature, there were plenty of opportunities for people to divide. And oftentimes, if a bill was, or a report out of committee was seen as so important that there really had to be unanimity, there had to be consensus, then that was a priority where people of goodwill were able to figure out a way to overcome the obstacle. And sometimes that would mean remove the one issue that was where there was an impasse. If instead the posture that we're headed toward is more of an absolute posture, it must be, and it has to be absolute, then that will lead to a divided report. I think that will diminish the report. So I think that unanimous support positions the work that has been put forward, and if that's to Sarah's recommendation, all but the one, then that will lead to that. And so in terms of our decision making, we're really at that point of, is it more? Do we see a value?
Whose truck is that? Rich's? Oh, he's in the jail?
Yeah, I went up to say hi. He wasn't there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's on for trial next week.
Trial? They're actually gonna go to a
Or can we come to a consensus on the 99% of it? So,
Right,
so that's all. That's my only comment.
Okay, so I want to hear from
Yeah.
Kevin also.
Well, I don't have much to add other than to say I agree. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate everybody's perspectives and the sincerity of it. When I look at a topic like this, me, it's not about who cares more about salmon. I don't see it that way at all. It's more about different perspectives on the best way to effectively care for salmon. But all that being said, I'm totally with what Richard just said. I agree with what he just said. I think we should take that one point out. If it did come to a vote on that one point, I would have to vote against it.
Thank you, Kevin. Karen.
I just have, this would be my addendum to Sarah's motion here. This is my attempt at consensus building. I would not vote in favor of it just by simply removing that recommendation. I would, however, consider voting for it if we included language, which is in our bylaws, saying that the commission, well, and we can reference it or we can wordsmith it, but if we said something to the effect of, while the commission did not reach consensus on state listing, the commission does, and just list what our role is. We advocate for the protection of fish and wildlife stocks on lands and waters subject to can we at least all agree that we're gonna do what we're supposed to be doing in our advocacy side of recommendations? To me, it feels like we're falling short of that specific Section 2, Part C bylaw if we don't include some language that we are pushing for this. Would people agree to that?
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm following you, Aaron. We may be at the point where we need to see an actual draft.
Yeah.
Just purely as a drafting matter, a way to perhaps get around this is just a footnote in the recommendations, and the footnote would read, we start off with the statutory obligation on protection, and can just read that there was a substantive discussion about listing salmon, and the commission MITSC decided at this point, didn't make that recommendation, but arguments on something. I mean, I can craft it much better than that. But that's the way, as a writer, if I was decided in my mind, I would try.
I mean, something to that extent, I mean, I would keep whatever that, if that's recommendation 3 or 4, I mean, I would still like to see this as a recommendation that we recommend. I mean, this is in our bylaws. We would recommend to the Maine Commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and the Maine legislature, right, to protect fish and wildlife stocks. I mean, we're just repeating. I mean, is that hard? What we already are supposed to be doing?
I'm just clarifying the
Yeah.
question. So you're proposing that rather than the recommendation of the listing?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like I wouldn't vote because it feels right. The analogy of a bunch of blue marbles and then remove, like, to me, I wouldn't vote in favor of the report because it feels incomplete. Because it's not doing this in terms of our recommendations. Because it says that we shall make these recommendations to do this work. I mean, it's literally in our bylaws. So I guess what I'm saying is we can remind, because the study kind of plays out in really interesting ways, the conditions and sort of factors that play into the particular situation. And I guess for me, some articulation of that we would perform this role and make.
Yeah, I think you're both saying.
Similar things. There can be a recommendation that just urges the IFW and
Yeah.
DMR to take all actions to protect
Yeah.
the species.
Yeah.
Or it can be in a footnote. I mean, that's a drafting problem.
Sort of listing, if that's the.
Right.
Because I'm hearing I mean, the resistance is that there, depending on how the state implements the state listing, that there would be additional permitting. And so that's the threat. But everyone is in agreement that we should protect the stocks. I mean, and we're supposed to, that's our role, is to make recommendations for that.
No, I think,
Yeah.
to Bob's point of view, just
Yeah.
see what that looks like.
Well, along that line, how about if we added the entire contents of Judd's memorandum on state listing of salmon as an endangered species, put that whole paragraph in there. And then put in the paragraph out of the statute that says what our responsibility is. And then put in a sentence that says, the committee was split as to whether to recommend listing. So you've got the whole thing in there, what listing may or may not do, what our charge is, and then what our conclusion was, that we were split.
Yeah, I mean, that's.
And I would put that as an addendum to the report so that it can be viewed separately, because then we agree on everything in the report. Then we state the case about listing and what our charge is, and then just say we didn't agree on this.
So I'm just gonna
Hello.
step in here for a second. Hold on, Bert. Hold tight.
What
So,
sec-
go ahead.
What section have you been reading from?
Section
Bylaws,
2, part
Section
C.
2, part C,
It's in our bylaws?
bylaws.
Oh, okay, I thought you were quoting statute. Bylaws.
I mean, our bylaws not relevant.
Yeah, of course
They
they're
are.
relevant.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
not-
absolutely.
I'm not saying that, but bylaws have different weight than statute because.
Oh, yeah, I
Yeah.
thought I had been consistently
Okay,
saying bylaws, because I mean,
I didn't,
there's-
I'm sorry. I
there's
missed it.
nothing in the statute that's section 2 part C.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I've been saying, what I said earlier also was, I appreciate that this is here, and that's why I asked Judd about is there a clock ticking on the recommendations or the report, where we don't have to like address it today, we could table this issue. Because Well, for number one, I would like more time with, right? I'm relatively new. I appreciate the comments and I hear the comments. And I also want to just say, like, pulling stuff out to get something to pass. I told you before, I was a former tribal council member for the Passamaquoddy tribe. And I've been in the legislative process in Augusta many, many times. I pulled myself back from that because I didn't like the way it operated, because that, they try to fit everything in and then, okay, well, you want all of this in this package. If you cut this bottle out, we're gonna take it and push it through. Well, the bottle, might be the most important part. So, where I'm gonna put my water now in the rest of the bill. So, and I understand, we can all disagree, and I respect each and every one of you, and I appreciate all of the comments. Like I said, I want to be the MITSC chair. I don't want to be pushing any agenda, and I'm not. I'm just trying to carve out some additional time for myself to review in more detail the recommendations, and Judd is telling me that there is no clock ticking. And I think Bob asked for an additional draft if we're going to make any changes at all to it. And I'm not suggesting that we do. I'm not suggesting we take anybody's changes. And I feel like, we can come to some agreement. Maybe there's something that, Zeke needs to hear, or Kevin needs to hear that, makes them, say, okay, yeah, we can do this, right? I think there's a way to get there. And so I would ask if we could table it. I'm asking that. I know there's a motion on the table and a second, but I do want to hear from Zeke also, because I think Andrew heard that.
Oh, no, I didn't.
You didn't.
But tabling sounds fine to me. I think personally, I would like to hear from Sam. He's not here.
Right.
I know he does strong opinion.
Right. Right, and then everybody seems to have like a real strong opinion, and I appreciate that, because we should, right? We should be passionate about the work that we're doing here in this commission, because it's important, very important.
So move to table.
No, we can't do that. Sorry. I'm asking for that, but we can't do that right now, just in a second. I got some other stuff to do. Bert.
Thank you. Well, how we want to address this, the report. That's one thing. And I heard what Sarah had to say about maybe, putting certain things in there. But one thing I will say is I will not withdraw my motion, because regardless of how we decide we're going to go forth with the study here, I want it on record that I am living up to my responsibilities to creation, to my people, and to our brothers and sisters, the wildlife, as you call them. So regardless, like I said, regardless of how we decide we're going to put forth this study, my motion will be voted on. And whether, if we want to table it for now, yes, we can do that. I'll agree with that, hoping that, others that oppose it might see the necessity, because I truly don't believe enough has been done. If enough has been done, the salmon would not be even on the federal endangered species list. A lot of this so-called wildlife would not be on the endangered species list. These are my relatives. So there's no way I can back down from the motion that I made. yes, we can table it and we can have further discussion on how we want to implement that into this study. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Bert. So what was that motion? Rachel,
What was the
what
motion?
was the motion and first and second?
The motion Bert made?
Yeah.
I think Bert made a motion to recommend state listing and seat second.
State listing.
Well, yeah, can I ask about that? 'Cause
Yeah.
I think I think Bert's intent was to move the report, including the state listing recommendation.
Okay,
But what he
yes.
said was confusing, because what he
I
said
don't think
was,
so.
No, what I was referring to was making a recommendation to the state.
oh, separate from the report.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Thank you. So you just, a MITSC recommendation to the state. So you didn't make a motion on the report.
Misunderstood that.
Pardon?
Oh, I misunderstood that, but maybe Bert can explain a little more. Or-
So Bert, you had a question.
What is it?
You had a question.
Oh, just
From
because
the-
you explained that a little bit more.
So you weren't addressing the fishing study.
No, I was making a motion to make a recommendation to the state. Yeah, we were on the topic of this study, but thinking about all of the discussion. I mean, first of all, it shouldn't really be an issue when it comes to the study, whether how we whether or not we want that implemented into the study. The study is a study, okay, but the issue that came about is whether or not we would recommend to the state that the Atlantic salmon would be put on the state's endangered species list, and that's what I was referring to. The study, I think they're doing a really, really good job on this study. I kind of would be opposed to leaving out anything regarding the commission saying, leaving that portion out of that study. But in the meantime, I felt the need and a responsibility to go ahead and make that motion to make a recommendation to the state, because the study, maybe if we table it, we can accompany that with our recommendation to the state. The study can follow along with that recommendation. That gives them a little more to look at as far as what Judd has done, being commissioned by MITSC to, do this study, this report. But again, my plan is not to remove that motion that I have on the table.
Thank you, Bert. Okay, so I misunderstood as well. We did have some great discussion around the fishing study, which included a recommendation to list salmon as endangered. Paul,
Yeah,
so is that procedurally correct? We can do that?
that you can do what?
Make a motion to put salmon as endangered through this number 6A?
Well, the agenda item was the fishing study, but
Right,
not separate
right.
things. But I thought I heard a consensus to table.
Yes,
So Bert doesn't have to change his motion. It sounds
Okay.
like if there actually is a motion to table an agreement on that, then you don't have to resolve that right now.
okay, thank you. No, Zeke, are you okay?
Yeah, so when I seconded Bert earlier, I was under the impression he was talking about the
Fishing study.
fishing study, but I would still second that motion, understanding it now.
I do think it's appropriate to table it and put it on the agenda for next time. Because the suggestion has been to table it anyway. And I think that this is something that ought to be on the agenda in advance, so people are aware that vote is gonna be here. For example, Sam's not here today. He might want to vote on it.
Certainly will.
So I think, yeah, we should table it, put it on the agenda for next time.
Thank you, sir. And I agree. Like I said, I had asked for that initially as well, because I think it's something that's really important. And I appreciate, like I said, I do appreciate all the discussion and all the comments. And I respect each and every one of you for that. And, you know, in my positions in the past as tribal council and whatever I did for this, you know, for the Passamaquoddy tribe, I did my job as that. And whether people opposed me or not, that didn't matter to me, you know. And then, you know, you meet them outside and hey, you know, things are all, that's different from what happens inside these rooms. So, you know, we have a job as a commission, and that's what we're gonna do. And, you know, I hopefully will respect one another for all of the work that we do and all of the insights that we give one another as well. So thank you, and I'll move to table that. Well, I will move to table it, but I would like to table that 6A. until
So
next
we,
week.
so we would actually have to vote to table it.
You know, we can agree to table it, yes, and I think we all did,
By acclamation.
right? I'm not a big person on Roberts. You know, I would, you know, if I don't see any opposition, that's fine. So if there's opposition, somebody could say they oppose tabling it.
We're good.
We're good? So we'll table that we'll put that on the agenda first for next time.
Noel, I'd like to make a suggestion that we dispense with new business, because I think we can do it quite quickly. And then that leaves us the balance of our time to discuss the future role of MITSC.
Can I comment
Huh?
or follow up? I think on what Sarah just said, can I?
Go ahead.
Because I was gonna ask, you're about to embark on a huge topic, which is going to swallow the rest of this meeting, I think. I think looking at new business, and I think Sarah may have been alluding to this, I don't think we have to do staff updates on current developments. We can submit things to the commission in writing. The scheduling of meetings has been an ongoing issue. It's still, you may want to address that. And then on my proposal about the office, I guess I was just looking for an affirmation on that. I don't know that it has to come to a vote, but if there isn't any, if there aren't any commissioners who, you know, actively disagree,
Right.
just looking for basically consensus that, you know, that we could go ahead with, you know, with that.
I think the office space, MITSC office space, is an administrative function for you and Sarah, Rachel to figure out. Have you talked to, trying to remember his name, the owner of the trailer?
Glenn, we didn't wanna.
I haven't been in touch with Glenn yet, because
Okay.
to bring it to the commission. I mean, but you know, our lease runs out the end of June. It is time for us to be talking to him about whether we would extend. So if there isn't an objection, my intent is to talk to Glenn and let him know that for a variety of reasons, we've decided not to renew the lease, and we're gonna take the space at Cobscook.
And no,
You have 100% support of that from me as well. Yes,
No.
Bert?
as far as that build, you know, the office space, I think in the past, yeah, it is an administrative process, you know, that you know, decision that needs to be made. However, that's something that goes through the commission, you know, through the commission as a whole. That's how we wound up with that building. But I think, as far as I'm concerned, I think under the current situation and with what Paul has said in regard to our budget and all these things, the things that are included in utilizing that building, I think that it would be a good move. So I would vote on, to go forward with that. So, I mean, if it comes down to, if we wanted to make that vote right now, I'd go ahead and
So
do that.
you're not opposed?
I'm not opposed at all.
I support it.
Thank you. All right, I think we're all in agreement, Bert. And
I'll take that then as a consensus that we,
so the last thing on that new business item is the MITSC meeting schedule. And you guys and gals have already had discussion around meeting frequency and length. And what was there any outcome? Rachel?
I am not aware of any outcome yet.
Okay.
I know I've heard a number of people recommend that we move towards like longer meetings, less frequently, perhaps quarterly, like all day meetings, but I don't
Longer
think
than
there's
this one?
been,
Oh, my God.
I don't think there's been any, that was just a couple of people that I've heard express that. And then I've also heard people express that, that might not provide enough continuity.
Yeah, can I say something real quick? I know we had a discussion, and I'm trying to remember right off what we decided on, but I think part of that discussion was in line of, having a specific time, a date each month available. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to actually have that meeting, but something, to that effect, so that way it's kind of like, around the same time each month, but we would kind of decide whether we need that meeting in the following month or a couple months later. But I can't recall, how we went with that.
I'm not sure how that would work, Bert. I mean, how would that be managed? That sounds like it would be a little bit difficult to plan a meeting every 15th and then on the,
Well, not
on the 10th of the month, you say, well, I want a meeting, but
No,
Derek
just-
doesn't want one.
But I think
I'm just saying it'd be hard to manage if you did that.
there are some times where we need a time, where something comes up and we need to pull together a meeting. At least we had a day, that we kind of agreed on, that if we're going to do that, we'll do, we have a day in that particular month, but we don't necessarily have to do it that way.
You can
So
call me also.
I know I can call you. But
No, I'm just saying is if any of you, that's not just you, any of you can call me and say, I really, I'm strongly, I need a meeting right away. And, and then we could move that to something that could be happening. Yes, Paul?
well, I don't want to jump in front of any commissioners, but if.
I don't think you are.
Just Rachel.
Okay.
She's the one that wants.
You can jump in.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, my sense of it is, obviously, this has been a topic for a long time, and going back a couple of years now. My feeling is, I've heard, Bert's sentiment on this, and I get it. But my feeling is, at least for now, to go with what I think James in particular has outlined, that for at least for a while, you set quarterly meetings that'll be full meetings, hopefully in person. They'll be
Describe
basically,
full.
pardon?
Describe full. What's a full meeting?
Well, I mean, comparable to what MITSC had in the past. Start, in the morning, and you go as long as you need to go, but I mean, some of those meetings were 3 hours, some of them were 6 hours,
Okay,
but they were full in-person meetings. And, but I think James has pointed this out, and I think some others have, and I have supported this, that I also think it's really important that there be active committee activity between those quarterly meetings, so that those committees are bringing things to those meetings. So there's going on. And then obviously the staff is working, but also the committee working with the staff and bringing things to those quarterly meetings. If you're going to do quarterly meetings, I really think it's critical that you have active committees that are going to bring things to those quarterly meetings.
okay, thank you.
That's my, and I don't know that that's an ideal solution, but given all the discussion that's gone on now for a long time, that would be my recommendation.
It's definitely an idea.
I was only gonna offer that if this didn't feel like something we could agree on quickly to avoid taking a lot of time from this other bigger discussion, I could send out a survey to everyone if that's helpful and try and gather responses, but maybe we can decide
No, I
right
think,
now.
I think we can decide right now. I mean, it's not that big of an issue, I don't think.
Okay, great. That would be preferable.
I mean, what do people think about that quarterly?
However we do it, if we can just simply have a predictable date known well in advance, that isn't subject to change. So if those 4 quarterly meetings are set, the date, that would be great.
I agree.
I agree with that.
Well, I agree with that, but I don't think quarterly is enough. I think, bi-monthly, or monthly. I don't think quarterly is enough.
Anyone
I
else?
think, I think bi-monthly might be better too. However, I'm also open to the quarterly, but I agree. I stated it before. Our meetings have not been enough, and they haven't been long enough, to cover. I mean, this one, we could have been longer for if we were in person, fully in person. But I think I would be okay with either bi-monthly or quarterly.
Strong ideas from the online group?
Yeah, the other thing I'd add to that, because I think it ties in, is the frequency of the meetings to me depends on what the commissioners are going to do and what the staff's going to do. I'd like to empower to the fullest possible extent our staff who's paid either full-time or part-time to be working on MITSC's behalf every day. As commissioners, I'm generalizing because we're different ages and so forth, but as commissioners, we've all got already full-time jobs or more than one full-time thing we're trying to work on. And I think part of the problem, or part of the solution, better said, is more latitude, empowerment, encouragement to take the ball and run with it for staff, so that commissioners are reviewing activity, helping to guide activity, helping to prioritize activity, but not, for the most part, doing the paid heavy lifting day by day work. And if we could reset along those lines, I think quarterly meetings, with the ability, as you said, Newell, for any group of us to check in anytime on any subject. It's not like we can't talk between meetings, but for quarterly meetings with a real staff-led approach, I think see us move in that type of direction, because I also think we got to keep in mind recruiting new directors. And and the kind of people you want to be commissioners, I think, are people who are already busy. And so, anyway, that's
Yeah.
kind
No,
of.
I hear you. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. And I hear also that if we had a set point in time also, I think that would be good. And I think the committees in between would also be good. And then if, like I told Bert, like if you, any of you had a concern that needed to come to the commission, some of you may hear from constituents that, you know, there's whatever. I think, do we have to give public notice for meetings, Paul?
Yes.
Meetings we are required to do notices.
Like 4 days or something?
7 days.
7 days, okay. So, you know, we could have a meeting within 7 days if necessary. And I mean, that certainly could be virtual nowadays, obviously. But if we talked about, you know, having the 15th of June and the 15th of September and whatever, as set times to have the in-person longer meetings, where we could get stuff done, and then the committees in between. Like, is there, right now, is there administrative committee?
Yes.
Now there are 3 committees. There's an administrative committee, natural resources committee, and a legislation/policy committee.
Woohoo, legislation policy. That's, I want that.
We're done.
This is a good one. That was
I think when we were talking about, you know, like when, you know, doing the quarterly meetings, we were trying to, you know, set a specific week, you know, a day. And I think if we go with that, you know, 3 months from now, you know, we're talking about, well, basically it's the second Friday, you know, the full Friday or whatever, of each month. I said full Friday. Anyway, so I think the next one would, if we followed that, it'd be September 9th.
Okay. Is that okay? I think
Yeah.
what I'm hearing is second Friday of every quarter. Is that right? That's what I heard.
It's not the second Friday of every quarter, but it's
No, yeah, of the month of of the particular month, but
Well, June, September, December, March.
yeah.
it's actually the second Friday of the 3rd month of each quarter.
What? Second
something to
Friday?
do with, is it a week?
Would that be okay? And then these committees, I would like to see them meet like at least maybe twice in between. If that could happen. Who's on the administrative?
It's Bert, Kevin, Richard, and who am I leaving out?
Joey?
Sandy.
Oh, Sandy.
Sandy.
Oh, Sandy, that's who it
Okay.
was. Oh, we'll throw Joey in there too. But
And natural resources?
Sam?
Sarah Cashwell.
Sarah Cashwell?
Joey, and
Sarah, comma, Cashwell.
How'd that happen?
Joey and Sam, but I think John Cashwell is finished.
Has his term expired already?
It was expiring this month.
Okay.
So Sarah, John, Sam,
Cross
And
John
Joey
off, he's gonna be
Barnes.
gone.
and what was the other committee?
legislative policy. That's, me and
That would be
Bob.
the Legislative Policy
Me,
Committee,
Bob, James.
which is everybody else.
Me,
was. And I'd like
James,
to
Bob, and
follow in those footsteps if we can.
James, this is
James
James's
is
last.
last.
There's other rules. There's other ways to do it.
Okay,
Um, I just have
That's
my-
Yeah.
so
Do you need your?
Oh, no.
Oh, no, no,
Actually,
okay.
I have it.
Are you
on
taking
my-
notes on
I've
that?
got it
Yeah.
written on my calendar.
Sorry, what
are you
was
taking
that?
notes on the meeting times?
Yes, I am.
What date in September did we decide?
9.
Well, it's the second Friday.
Okay.
September, second Friday, December, second Friday, March, second Friday, June. And the committees can meet in between. I'm not gonna govern.
And while I'm looking at it here, HPMI recently decided on the recognition day date, which is the 17th of September. So the Saturday after that meeting. Everyone's invited.
Good celebration.
Recognition day. It's Holt's powwow, essentially.
And I'm still going to promote the idea that we have a retreat. And that came up in a conversation that Paul and I had with Sandy too, just to get more, since she wasn't able to be at the last meeting or this one because of her schedule. We just talked to her more about the questions and, some of her thoughts, and she strongly promoted the need for strategic planning in the form of a retreat. So putting that out there. And we even talked about the possibility of doing it maybe around Passamaquoddy days.
In
and I-
August.
Yeah, but I can send out, we don't need to take time in this meeting for that. I can send out a meeting list.
All right, thank you.
No,
Yes.
I'm wondering if that retreat should be in the fall because Cashel's term has expired. This is James' last meeting. My term is expiring. So the governor's got to make 3 more appointments. Oh, actually, they have to go before judiciary. So it might be a while before. I was just thinking it would make sense for the new commissioners to attend that retreat and get to know people and get to know what the issues are. And
That's a good point. One of the first meetings I attended was the retreat. And it was nice. Nice way to meet people.
You guys do like trust balls? Like that?
Yeah, well, my very first meeting was also, well, when was it? Anyway, it was, and it was hosted by the Holton Band of Maliseets at their very nice campground there. And anyway, I think I just have to be careful that I get the moose that I need during that time because that is hunting season.
Yeah, we'll work around your schedule.
Well, I literally mentioned that to my family that the freezers are going bare, and I didn't make it up this past year, so I have to take care of it this year. So I'll be up that way.
So back to your comments there. So Mills would have to make appointments again when?
anytime,
Oh, she could make them anytime,
but they have to go before the judiciary committee,
which are on, right.
which won't meet until January unless there's a special setup. Well, or
They can, it depends. The governor can start the process and have the committees meet.
okay,
She can call the Senate in to
Okay.
vote on confirmations in the fall.
Okay.
Oftentimes governors do that if their term is coming to an end before the election. If they want to make sure
Yeah.
they fill seats in case they are not reelected. So I don't know whether Governor Mills intends to do that, but that has been the process, which is generally a fall, August, September type process.
Okay, thank you.
So wouldn't it be a good idea for the commissioners that are whose term is expiring, to mention that to the governor. That way she can make a decision here soon.
I think the governor's staff is, they're aware of all the boards and commissions and appointments that she has to make before, before her term ends.
Okay, so that would put us into October, November. If the retreat happens.
Yes.
We can meet in Baltimore.
What? Meet in Baltimore?
For the retreat.
All right, I got the medicine wheel right out back.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Paul, was there anything else on that item?
No, I think we should move on. You've only got 48 minutes left for a gigantic topic.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great topic, though. Yes, you want to take a little break? We're gonna take a 5-minute break, Paul. Come on.
I was just gonna give you an agenda, so you can, yeah. So we've got done everything except for this, which is the sort of, this is this try and stay together. And I have, I mean, are you guys able to join me after? Or, I have James Francis, who's the director of the Penobscot Nation's Cultural Resource Department, meet us at one of the local places.
Okay, tell me what the local place is.
Yeah, I'll tell you. It's called Orno Brewing Company, and it's you're gonna meet there at 5.
Okay.
So if you wanna get there whenever it opens at 4.
Yeah.
But it's outside seating and everything. It's just like,
How was everything else? How was,
Yeah.
Okay, is this my agenda?
Yeah.
What is doing?
Hi, I'm
Oh, this is
Darren.
my friend, Charlene.
Oh, Charlie, nice to meet you, Darren. Yeah.
An all-around badass.
That's right. Yeah, for
Yes.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. So what do you have? I can't remember. Have you been up here before?
No,
No, never.
Never even contacted. And already, I'm saying that my character comes to this space.
Yeah.
And I've already ruined everything. I had no sense of spatial, how far
Oh,
everything was
how
away.
far? Yeah.
And I was just
That's
rewriting
enormous.
everything.
Yeah, remoteness. I know. I remember I brought a friend up here once when I was in graduate school, and it was like she made the comparison. It was like it's like where she thought of it as where life is not. She's like, this is you're going away from the people and you're going into the wilderness. So I was like, yeah, that's the way we like it. So.
That's where that's.
Yeah, for sure.
This is cool. So how often do you do this quarterly?
So we actually have been meeting monthly, pretty much for the last few months. But
do you think that Zoom allows for more frequent?
yeah, now this is just our second meeting live. So kind of what happened was with Zoom, they were doing more frequent, shorter meetings, and I think the discussion you just heard was in person, longer meetings, less frequently. So, yeah. But I'm new to this commission. I just joined in November. And
Were you appointed?
I was appointed by the tribe. Yeah, by the tribe. Yeah. Yeah. So Bert, he's the other Penobscot representative, and then you have the other tribes. And Newell is Passamaquoddy, and he's the new chair of the commission, and the chair is selected by the commissioners. And so he's new to that role. in the last couple of months. You might have heard him say like, I'm new to this stuff. He's amazing. He's a language keeper, spiritual. He's a health person. Yeah, he's really awesome. So, and yeah, you missed the fireworks. Yeah, we're all like, list the salmon, or they were like, no, don't list the salmon. Anyway, it was like this whole thing. I got totally up on my little soapbox. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And so like was the end result was two table.
Yeah. Yeah.
discussion.
You're right. You caught that. Yeah. Yeah. I guess so. In the interest, it's so funny because I was sort of helping run a meeting recently where it was like consensus oriented. Consensus is, you know, if that's your goal, it's really tricky.
It really is.
Yeah.
Like moving anyone towards consensus means having to pound down the concerns.
Oh yeah,
You know what I
for
mean? In a
sure.
real way.
Like really deep into it. Yeah.
You really have to, you know? And so consensus is a kind of a persuasive job.
Yeah.
Let's just gathering opinions.
And I really, I screwed it up in my meeting. I thought I had heard a consensus and I repeated it, and then they're like, nope, that's totally not, you didn't get it. And I was like, oh man. Then it kind of, because then it kind of hurts the feelings of the people who were kind of more in favor, you know, like, so like.
Also like the way meetings go, to actually feel how people are feeling. Like essentially it's like, I don't know how I feel about Robert's rules of law. So I'm just
Yeah,
gonna
right,
say-
exactly.
I'm
Like,
gonna say what we all
yeah,
think, right?
yeah,
So,
exactly.
like sending a motion out, seconding a motion, right? It's just like, this is how everyone feels.
Yeah. Well, and we employ, and we did, and this is actually how we caught it, we employ in the sort of some of the native peacemaking traditions, we actually, for consensus, we make sure everyone gets the stick or feather or whatever to share back to make sure that consensus is reached, right? That, you know, this is what's on the table, you know, how do you feel about it? And everyone gets to still have like, it's not a vote per se, but it is an acclamation of, you know, consensus.
And there's also like a real recognition.
Yeah, yeah.
Someone saying peace.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
It's interesting to make that visible. Since pass it
Totally.
around.
Yeah, and so here it becomes like, you know, who's ever gonna raise their hand and like who has that energy. But sometimes the quiet people, you know, and the ones that are, you force them to kind of think about it too and hand them the stick.
Yeah,
So.
that's true. Where would you land on that spectrum of
Yeah.
quiet versus?
Oh no, obviously I'm not very quiet. It's always, you know, being a professor, that's a harder.
It's hard to keep it shut.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
I have an idea.
Yeah, it's fun though. So this is our second meeting here. This is the Mitchell Center, which I, you know, part of my appointment is in this sustainability solutions thing. So. What's that? Yeah. Yep. So all the tribal people left, but Don Penobscot, Newell is Passamaquoddy, Zeke, who's sitting right in front of you, he's Maliseet. And yeah, that's all the tribes that are represented. Joseph Barnes is Passamaquoddy. Bird is Penobscot, I think I mentioned. So yeah, we have a fourth nation here in Maine that's not on this commission. It's the Micmac Nation. Part of it is because they weren't part of this law that established the Settlement Act and this commission. So they have a different process. Indirectly, but not directly, because the legislation is different. We're only bound by our legislation and our bylaws. And, I was really into quoting from them today, so that was fun. But the idea that, yeah, they would be subject to the broader stuff, but this commission it can indirectly impact them. But part of our bylaws is specifically to say that they, you know, are encouraged to attend and offer their opinions. I've only been in one meeting where someone from Micmac Nation was there. but it was to a specific issue that they wanted to speak on. What's that? No, they don't have a similar sort of legislative makeup with the state. This is like meant to, yeah, this is meant to be a decision-making body that solves problems that can arise between the state and the tribes.
I just recently was reading something about a law. I don't know what the result of it was. It was essentially kind of about tribal self-determination.
Yeah.
And I saw just a lot of like young kids at UM doing some protests over that. And like, is that the type of issue that this council would take?
And this is a little bit more like in the policy realm and sort of assessing, are the sort of legal and policy issues between the state and the tribes, how are they going? And is there a role for this body to help with that? But the discussion that we're going to have next is actually kind of what role do we want to have? It's a very busy, tribal state relations have shifted in the last couple of years. There was several bills passed in the last state legislature that kind of sorted through some of the problems we've had. So it's sort of like, what's next for this commission is the discussion that we're going to have, I guess, in half an hour. But it won't be with this. I mean, I think you heard like there's a lot of nothing's coming quick in this space here.
I think it's good when it doesn't come.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So yeah, if it gets boring or whatever, yeah, the place is called Orono Brewing Company, and I think the address is here. I'll look it up and send you the.
Yeah, it's 3:23 now.
It might be. We're at a bagel shop this morning and we were immediately found out it's not open. Because we pronounced where we were living as Arona. They were just like, where are you from? It's like, how do you know we're not from here?
That's so funny.
It's the way you said it.
From the tribe's perspective, what they think MITSC could do to I'm thinking when we fishing study.
Right, yeah.
Very good.
I've heard of that.
And I think the more that we can do to focus on social and economic educational issues that are.
They don't give us a lot.
They have a couple of different.
But I think that's just the one.
No, it's the one here in Oregon. That one, Margin. What did I say?
Oh, Margin Street. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it opens at 4. Yep. It has plenty of outdoor seating, so it'll be nice for them.
Wow.
James can really help orient you too.
Yeah.
Your journey up here. Yeah.
It's already been great.
He said, can I play bad cop? Because I was trying to, and I was like, I assume so.
Yeah, yes. Good for that.
That's kind of. Those kinds of things.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
One of the things that is certified, you know,
Really?
There were many things that everybody.
Totally.
No, the other one is a bigger issue.
I honestly had pictures.
Yeah.
That's great to know.
That's good. Yeah, that's why you go to places,
That's why
right?
you go.
Yeah,
That's why
yeah.
you know, that's the anthropologist You know what I mean? I can't write about it. George Marcus would be rolling over in it.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Is he still alive?
He's still alive.
Yeah.
He's still alive. He left Rice right when I was coming. So he was like my advisor for like 6 years.
Oh, that's too bad though. And that's when he
Went to Irvine.
Irvine, that's right. Sorry, I confused him with the other guy they were together, they wrote the book together. Fisher, he went to MIT.
He did.
Yeah, because I would run into him when I was in grad school. He would even come to the Harvard Library. Yeah, I would see him there.
Oh, man. That was our like bread and butter.
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah, right.
This is what we do.
Uh-huh.
It's really changing now, but if they were, for example, that kind of being there at Rice.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
how you write.
Especially writing, the writing culture
The writing
approach.
part of it, yeah, you know what I mean? And so I can see that it's gonna be. So what happened there was that you know? Let's not run it. You know
Yeah,
what I
right.
mean?
Right, well, and are you staying in one of the hotels here in Orono?
Yeah, we're staying in like
Airbnb, okay.
It's like
More.
on Summer Street. Very nice. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
And I think that there's a lot of people that think.
Well, like I said.
Well,
This was somebody who was Freeport together, not having separate.
I don't know, it's just those kinds of things that I think that need a better, maybe a better explanation.
No, it's artesian.
It's your role.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Help people say there's nothing wrong. It tastes like art, tastes like rust, it smells awful. I'll get the filters.
Those topics.
Yeah, even in my own house, I have these.
Yeah.
For me, as a staff.
Yeah, right.
And I have an ultraviolet.
Right. I don't know, I think. Must be other topics like.
My water is.
Like fisheries topic. Oversee it, to grant.
Yeah.
And this business is working with, coastal enterprises.
Used it so far, it's all over.
No,
Cobb's Cookies.
Cobb's Cookies, okay. I think that a lot of times, if you've written grants, you probably, a lot of times funders look for collaborations. And so I think that if you're in that same building and collaborate with them, to see the funds that might help. Probably a lot of times.
Are we ready? Hey, Paul, are we ready?
Yeah, I think so. You're moving on to the
Yep.
next.
Six
I
B.
suggest that Newell, I guess either you take the lead on it or defer and let Rachel, because she was the one collecting the
Yep,
response.
I'm just gonna make one comment and then turn it over.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just collected the information and gave it back to all of you.
I know Rachel has all of the information.
So I don't know. I think it's appropriate for you to lead that conversation.
But-
I'll jump in.
Well, I'm gonna start the conversation. So I have, what Rachel sent over to me and then I had, thoughts of my own and stuff. I did not submit any comments because like I said before, I'm the MITSC chair, so I'm not going to, I didn't want to color anybody's view of what I'm looking for. So I'm really not looking for anything other than the commission doing its job and what we're designed and asked to do through the legislative process of our implementing it. So, and I read down through a couple of them and I didn't get to all of them, but I would just like, and I know we got limited time because I do have to leave at 4, but I'd like to hear a couple of minutes of like your top 1 or 2 things that you'd like to hear, see, or do. And I'm gonna start with Bob on my left.
Okay. I apologize. I wrote up what I wrote, not really to fit into Rachel's format, but as a essay, and doesn't work very well. But
Newell, can I interject that I'm having a hard time. I heard both you and Bob, I'm having a hard time hearing.
I'll try to keep my voice up. I said, oh, it's CIA.
Yeah, fun. We're all fun.
I said earlier that this is a unique organization, and it is. I don't think there's another state tribal group anywhere, certainly in the lower 48, that is a deliberative body composed of groups from both demographic. Our vision, although it is laid down fairly specifically in the statute, it's not hard to see that the drafters meant to boost state tribal relations generally. So I take a certain amount of license interpreting the statutes to reach the conclusion that would enhance state tribal relations. It's probably within our authority, one way or another, if only under the reporting clause of the acts, we can report on anything. I think to a large extent, the commission has taken on, has been reflective of the ambient relationship between the state and the tribes over the past 30 years. And until the task force began its work 3+ years ago, it was fairly easy to characterize the relationship as strained. Quickly after the acts became effective, judicial interpretations and administrative interpretations were adopted by the state, which quickly came to convince the tribes that the act was not working out, acts were not working out as they'd expected. And it was the commission's job to let the legislature know what those complaints and grievances were, and the commission did. Sort of a personal note on this, after having gone through all those published reports that are on our website in the last year. The commission's published reports rarely, if ever, advocated repeal or far-ranging amendment of existing statutes. To the contrary, they argued that the statutes were simply being interpreted incorrectly and that they could be interpreted differently with a much more favorable result for tribes. As I look back on it, that's actually a great strategy. You don't have to report them to the legislature, but it didn't work because it was just too subtle. It had no leverage behind it to get any of the state levers of power to change their attitude. Until finally, task force was created, and it did the job which the commission might have been doing over the last 30 years to the legislature. I meant what I said, even if half jokingly, when I said some credit has been this last 3 years for nobody having MITSC, nobody having embarrassed any of the governments. Even if nobody knows what we do, at least nobody can say, oh, those people, they took the whole thing off the track. I do think, Zeke who said, gee, not his words, but that if the legislature and the tribal chiefs are negotiating themselves, what are we really doing as brokers? The more I thought about it, more I think, I like simpler things better. If the tribes will talk to the legislature, really, what do they need? They will need us or something like us or something. I'm not sure yet just what it is. I would like to know tribal ambassadors, Mullion and Representative and before too long. See, what is the nature of contacts between state and tribal leaderships? I mean, is it, do they pick up the phone and talk to whoever it is, state government, and vice versa? Or is it one of these things where, I'm sorry, that's not my department, I have to talk to somebody else, don't know. I have the impression that police, public safety, ambulance crews and so on, they've worked that all out in communities, you know, around the reservations and so on. All the ambulances, carrier is either Passamaquoddy Tribe property, ambulance, does it work that smooth? Work that smoothly in other spheres? To maybe it's too early to ask to see new more leaders feel like they need a liaison agent to help them deal with the state, and if you do, be glad to get on the phone. State government might like to. They would probably, people in state government probably appreciate having this dispatch of contact, communicate with tribes. I don't know, is that more than we need in a state with 1.2 million people and natives? Or is there still an unmet demand there, sort of between the lines of 1980 acts, where MITSC or something like it is needed to act as liaison, as diplomatic frontier, as educator, or what have you? MITSC has been at a stalemate for much of its history because sponsoring governments have been at odds. I would like to think that MITSC could be something of a leader, showing the state and tribal leaders in government that there is plenty of daylight between that can be bridged. Said to Rachel during the break, I think what we really need is an epic party. Afraid that budgetary situation, state situation, such that it couldn't happen. But I think there will be a market for some liaison service in the future. I'd like to be a little bit ahead of the curve instead of being called in by the legislature, asked why can't we do this or that.
Okay.
But I will yield back.
Oh, thank you. I see Joe has hand up. Joseph.
Sorry, I've got to go. I'm at my game. I've got to ump a high school playoff game.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll see you. Thank you.
Take care.
All right, thanks.
Umpire. So I'm gonna go back to one person on the screen and then we'll come back to the table again. Bert. 3 minutes, Bert.
Hello. 3 minutes, that's it?
What's up?
Why do I only get 3 minutes? You guys conspiring. Hey, I'm just joking. So, I did not submit a response only because I was kind of waiting on some information to come back to me, you know, before I did so, but I didn't get that till like this morning. Anyhow, but you know, just in general, you know, I read the responses that were submitted, and I'm pretty impressed for the most part. The thing is, how should MITSC evolve in this new environment of tribal state relations? And you know, I think what I have to say kind of you know goes toward each one of these questions in a sense, because you know you think about statute, you know what our statutory responsibility is as a commission. You know, it evolves. It was put together, I think, with, I don't know if it was intentional on the state's part, but I don't see anything in our statutes that limits us as a commission, because we are not a governmental entity. Whether it's a state or tribal, we represent those our respective governments. So as far as how this commission evolves and the way we do things, I don't see there being really any restrictions. I know sometimes even the way that some of the things we wind up doing, I hear some of the commissioners talk about, well, I don't know how the state, how the governor would want this, or legislature would want that. We're not governed by them. They can kind of put their views forth, but as far as how we operate, we have our bylaws. We go. But as far as statutory, I don't see us having that many constrictions or restrictions. But I do. That's what I have to say about that. But one of the things that I did, I reached out basically to our former commissioner, the guru of MITSC, John Banks, just to get an idea what his thoughts are, because it made, to me, it made sense, because he is, has been the longest seated commissioner. He pretty much came on during, almost to the onset of this commission. So he had that knowledge, that memory, and as far as all the things that transpired from the time he came on to even to now, he pays attention to what's going on. He's probably listening to us right now. But so what I kind of threw these questions toward him to get his idea, and basically it coincided with some of the things that I wanted to, well, at least part of what I wanted to say. He added a couple extra things. Anyway, so this is his answers was, I'd like to see MITSC follow up with monitoring and evaluation of the Wabanaki education mandate in LD 291. That bill was a MITSC initiative, and its status should be reviewed. When they see that its implementation is spotty, they could meet with state education leaders to see how to improve it. Next was education and outreach on Wabanaki history, culture, and governance is key. Perhaps MITSC could invite Pender Macon, State of Maine Commissioner of Education, to a meeting to hear this concern and plan a path forward to get better implementation. And I think that's one of the big things, because from the time I've been on this commission, that's one of the things we found ourselves doing over and over and over. When the state legislature changes over, you have new legislators, whether in the Senate or the House, and a lot of them are oblivious to the Settlement Act. They might have heard about the Settlement Act, but have no idea. And part of it also goes back to, and I reiterate this, Article 10, Section 5 of Maine's Constitution. They're not, a lot of them aren't even aware that exists, which is one of the things that still are in law. And as long as the state doesn't abide by that, they're breaking their own laws. So it's important for them to know that. How are they going to know that? MITSC. Yes, we have certain things that we do, trying to bring forth all this information to, and make our recommendations. But the education process. Who do we educate? How do we make sure that people are educated? Because, you know, where do these legislators come from? They go to school. They go, you know, they go to high school. A lot of them go to high school right here in Maine. They go to university. And then all of a sudden they're going to be legislators, you know, governing and making laws, you know, that affect everyone, including the tribes. You know, it affects us, you know, whether they pertain to us, it affects us nonetheless. And that's where the key is when we're talking about relationships between the tribes and the state. In the past, the state government, municipal government, even federal government and corporations have done what they could to basically poison the idea of between or poison relationships between the non-native citizens of Maine and the citizens of the nation, the native nations. So, you know, that seems to be getting a little bit better. It could be better, but you know, that was a big thing is education, getting into the schools, you know, finding a way to implement that education to newcomers into the legislative body, you know, and how, you know, because the way what I've always heard is you know, you can't always claim, you know, that you didn't know something, you know, until, you know, once after you're taught better, you know, correct information, then you know. So you know, the decisions you make now, you know, you can't make that claim anymore. So, you know, what we do, you know, I think we hit on it a little bit, you know, earlier in our meeting, how we go about doing things. You know, we don't have this, you know, those restrictions that the governments, you know, normally give amongst themselves. You know, we are an intergovernmental body representing different, you know, different governments. So anyway, I might wind up babbling, so I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert.
Yeah. Okay, so Bert, to address what you're talking about with LD 291, you know, the Wabanaki Studies Bill that was passed a decade ago now. What's 2 decades ago? Holy. So
We're a lot
the,
older.
the ACLU of Maine recently did a study on whether or not any of that was actually being taught in the Maine schools. And it's in draft form right now, but it's being co-authored by the Wabanaki Alliance. And I wonder if there's a role for MITSC to reach out to support, to participate in some way. That's definitely a nice thought. But also to address what you were talking about, Bob. You know, we just went through this past legislative session. We had 3 bills of direct importance to us, the Wabanaki nations. And there were moments when the legislators wanted to know what tribal leadership thought. And they didn't turn here. They didn't ask MITSC. I was in the room towards the end of it, at least. And, you know, they would turn to the Wabanaki Alliance as a space where the leadership was meeting and creating a unified plan to present to legislators. And, you know, Kevin mentioned it too, that, you know, we can do more than just that kind of legislative piece that, you know, that was our role. It's in our statutes, but at least the direction from all of the nations this past legislative session has been to no longer use to break free from the limitations of the implementing act. And that means MITSC. So, if I think it is worth, I think Sandy said it too, all of us going back and talking to our leadership, finding out what they want. I think that should be our first step. This, I brought to Chief and we had a conversation about it. And her direction was that MITSC still performs an important function, but it must change. And, we need to facilitate that change ourselves. And so whatever we decide, if we change the way we operate as a commission, I think we should make it known and we should explain why. And we should, we should explain why we are changing, if we do choose to.
Yeah. And back to the screen, Kevin.
You're muted, Kevin.
I love what Zeke just said. I'm just like gonna line up behind that and stop right there.
Thank you.
I'm also on that same track. I think part of what we're witnessing is MITSC is a product of the implementing act. And if the fundamental premise and argument is that the implementing act is a disservice, not a service, is a failure, not a success, then by inference and implication, it's difficult to then allow MITSC to be successful because it's a contradictory notion if it's a component of the act. So I think that to be successful in the current and over the next 2 years of transition, I agree with a lot of the recommendations that take us out of a focus on political advocacy at the governmental level and look at community and look at social. And in other words, that the alliance has stepped in and performs that. The government-to-government discussion is going on. Attorneys from all the governments are in touch with each other. There are legislative seats that some are filled by nations and some have just decided not to fill them. The option is there to use that or not. So I think that ground is being covered by others in a more direct form. But in terms of the community out there, in terms of the state non-tribal member community and their understanding and awareness of the debate and the discussion and the bills and the action that occurred this session and the session before and what will likely be proposed in the next session, there's a huge gap. There's a huge gap there. Legislators may have dealt with issues in the legislature, but there damn few went home and explained anything to their constituencies, talk to them and say, this is what this is all about. This is what this means. Community doesn't. So my argument is that arena is covered with what you just, the parties at play and the list that we just mentioned. But on the local front, there's a gap where understanding has to be enhanced and could be assisted by the commission on local issues. I mean, it could be as simple as continuing to generate useful reports. The example around the lack of adherence to the academic agenda in the schools tribal instruction, that's a great suggestion. We can, that's a local issue, we can follow up on that type of thing. But I don't see that we're useful at the, in the legislative or direct government role. But the community at large, nobody's helping them. And I think we can help them. Here.
And James.
Hey, folks, I'm here. I apologize for not being on video. I'm actually picking up a couple of boys from school, but I would echo much of what Zeke and Richard and Kevin had just stated. I think it's really important to look at MITSC as, I think, a body that can have value, but it will command change as an organization before people start to pay attention to it as much as I think some folks would like to pay attention to it, or desire us to have folks pay attention and listen to what's going on. I might also add, and today's conversation was a good example of a case where I think MITSC can demonstrate value by building collaboration. I realize that the salmon discussion was not an easy one, and many of us are on very different sides of that. But in the echo chambers of Augusta, if there is an organization that is able to come out with unified recommendations and consensus building and collaboration, not always perfect, I completely acknowledge that. But if we can come to those sorts of conclusions in the future and demonstrate to policymakers that in many cases are making decisions of much larger magnitude, perhaps others can follow by example. And I did also share some other comments with Rachel, and I'm sure folks have seen those, but overall, I agree with the sentiment and hope that MITSC can reform itself in the future to maybe move in a new direction and begin to build some momentum in terms of the recommendations and work that we do.
Thank you, James.
In light of the time, I'm going to say that I agree with all these speakers before me. I do think that MITSC should focus on social, economic, educational issues. I think the Wabanaki Alliance has the political side pretty well covered. They've developed respect, and so I think that's good. I would like to see maybe Rachel send out a query particularly to the tribal representatives on what the tribes think that MITSC could do for them. And then I think we should see if we can do it. I think that our statute does have enough latitude in it to give us a little bit of room to do different things. I am pleased with the progress that has been made in the last few years. I'll say that.
Thank you. Mr. Ranko.
Well, Bert got on like 10 minutes. And I just want to point that out. No, I just want to say that, yeah,
Indian time.
I agree, and I think in principle with everyone. My comments in very consistent ways were to have strong communication with our governments, what our tribes want. I have a pretty open dialogue with my chief, so I feel like I have a sense of that, but I'm happy to go back. And I think being bold and I guess my only concern about what we've been saying right now is that it could be too vague and too broad to have any sort of brand and action oriented to it. So again, as a scholar, I'm really interested in depth and problem solving in like the most kind of attentive ways that we can. I think there's real opportunities if it's in the education field, if it's in economics or any of these particular things, I just want it to be done with depth and integrity and not just we're searching for any social cause or, I think being really defined and engaging it in a really deep and serious way is something that, and I appreciate talking to people who I don't agree with. So I love this space personally. And hopefully people understood that I enjoy it. But that this idea that is really, I think that depth adds a lot of weight to what we could be seen as, as opposed to being merely political, right? I think the depth and the idea that we are representatives of these governments and creating frameworks of problem solving, that would be a new day for MITSC, and that's what I hope.
Thank you. Yeah, so I appreciate all of that. And I would, like I said, I will give more detail to, more in-depth detail to the report, to the comments that were made from Rachel forwarded on to me as well. And it's my first MITSC meeting, so I'm happy that, I was able to attend and be present in the chair, and hopefully, we're gonna do some good stuff. I'm open to discussion with anyone. And I will be reaching out to each and every one of you.
I just want to say thank you. Your leadership was sorely needed, and you brought a lot to that.
Just felt today.
Welcome and thank you.
And thank you all online there too.
Even you, Burke.
All right. So I'd love to like hang out. My granddaughter beckons.
Yes, that is important.
So I know we dropped out of quorum, so I don't know if we even need to vote. We can do this on consensus, right?
Thank you.
Paul, I hope you feel well.
I forwarded to that sign.
I saw that.
Okay.
Send as
We
much
can see what you play around with.
vibes your way as I can.
Okay, but we have.
Thank you so much.
Heard me.
I sent you some examples. No, I sent you some examples.
Yes. Yep. I think it will. Oh, I think so, maybe. We'll find out, right?
Bye, everybody.
Yeah,
Bye,
Bert. Take care.
Stay safe. And Paul, you get healthy.
Thanks, Bert.
Home, Bert.
All right.
Bye.
All right. Take care.
Yeah.
Hi, Darren. Still long way, still thanks. I would love to have first we'll talk about Andre, but I really want to talk to you.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, and I'm involved all the time.
Yeah, I know that you really have to figure out the pulse of that, and I just really want to learn more as a staff member of MITSC.
Yeah, and MITSC used to have, the original law, right?
Yeah, I've been looking through all the archives.
Yeah.
It's very long.
Yeah.
I would love to learn.
Yeah, we have,
Okay.
I'm always possibly gonna do that.
Yeah.
Hopefully at some point this summer, it'll,
Yes.
I feel like my August.
And anyone take food with you. Yeah, I don't.
All right. Yeah, Zeke is, I'm seeing the ambassador.
Yeah, really cool. Yeah. Well, Paul is coming.
Okay.
Nice seeing you.
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah, and we might still be live streaming.
Oh, nothing to be ashamed of.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on between the legislature and the governor. But good luck, Zeke.
I'll call you shortly.
Are you going to be making public appearances?
Yes, though that is something that I definitely need a lot more practice with. But yes, that's the goal.
Gotta maintain a Facebook page like Molly does.
I know, right? That's the part that I could take some serious direction from her. That's incredible. But yeah, I have a Facebook page.
I want to see that thesis when it's ready.
Oh yeah, I can't wait. It's getting close. But
Well, thanks, Zeke. Thanks for coming to the meeting, and I'll see you next week if that,
yeah,
if coming up Thursday works. And I still haven't reached out to Sam. I'd love to connect with him too. So I don't know. Yeah, I was thinking it would be great to just, have further conversations with you, get a show me from the community there. And I was even thinking of doing like a short interview about share really that I could be working on featuring you, like with our new website.